Joe, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for taking care of last night, the second 2 hours, as I had.
Yeah, you had a sleeping arrangement. I mean,
yeah.
No, I'm kidding. You had a personal matter that you couldn't reschedule that had to be done at that time, and that was okay. It went well, smooth.
Good.
That's thanks to Stan and some great callers. And also, folks who are listening who like the interactive chat and they know it's not on today, you go over to Cuban. There is a chat there for people who aren't familiar with it. It's the Hagman and HagmanReport.com. Spell it all out. Christians United Broadcasting Network, if you would still like to do that. But with that, we do have our guest on for today.
Just to be clear, that's a function of the Christians United Broadcasting. We have no control over that. That's just
no, but I've gotten several emails, that's usual, so I just want to remind people that that's there if they would like to use that. Go to our website at homelandsecurityus.com. You wrote a good promo tonight for tonight's show.
Yes, early this morning, and before, you know what, thank you for saying that. Before we bring our guest on for tonight, I just would like to remind everyone, it was on this program that Steve Quayle and the Guerrilla Economist had appeared January 11th, 2013, 18 months ago, and gave you the forecast, both of them. And Steve's been ringing the bell for decades, but gave you the forecast for the last 18 months. And I got to tell you, if you go back and listen to that show, and you go back, and if you listen to the subsequent shows, you will find that Steve Quayle and V together have been right on the money with everything that they've said. Oh, timing might be off, a week or two or a month or two, but they never really zeroed in on timing. It was all about the concept, the conceptual aspect of the killing of the dollar. I'm sorry, Joe.
Well,
go ahead.
I'm still waiting for silver to hit 300 an ounce,
Oh, just hang in there.
I blame V. And with that, we'll bring Steve and V on. Gentlemen, it's great to have you back on the show. The Guerrilla Economist V, his website is roguemoney.net, and Steve from stevequayle.com. Very familiar voices here on our show. It's great to have you back, and I'll turn it over to Steve.
Well, good evening, everyone. And by the way, will anybody send me emails? I'm going to try and control the modulation of my voice on the phone. Sometimes I guess I'm too loud. Other times people say I'm too. I'm using just a standard headset. The reason I don't have a handset is my headset won't hook up with this phone, so I'm trying to get that remedied. So if anybody thinks I'm overdriving the mic, on my headset, just send me an email and I'll back down my volume. Tonight we're going to deal with a very important subject, and it's almost like, Doug and Joe, there's a disconnect. And there's a disconnect on what the death of the American dollar really means, and that's why the title, when V and I were talking about this prior to going on the show tonight, we were talking about the Bataan Death March, and what people need to just, go look it up, but I'll give you a real quick glimpse of it historically. The point being is it began on April 9th, 1942, and was a forcible transfer by the Imperial Japanese Army of 60 to 80,000 Filipino and American prisoners of war after the 3-month Battle of Bataan. It's one of the most brutal. It's one of the most historically sickening marches. The Japanese were totally unprepared for the prisoners of war that they were going to take. And outside of summary execution of some place between 350 and 400 Filipino officers and NCOs, there was brutality that can only be, actually, Doug and Joe and V, only can be likened to what's going on in Syria right now and what's also going on in Iraq. So the wisdom of Solomon is being repeated right now, and there's nothing new under the sun, for that which will be has already been. And one of the things that we've got to cover tonight is the nature of what it means that the dollar is dying. Now, this is probably there's only two things I believe the administration and the slaughterhouse has ever said that were true. Number one, America is the greatest country in the world, and they intend to change all that, and that's been done. And number two, that they intend to kill the dollar, and that's been done. So, that's two truths that are playing out. But Michael Savage, when he started his career on radio broadcasting, or at least when I started listening to him years and years ago, he always said the ultimate war would be for borders, language, and culture. You guys remember hearing Michael Savage say that over and over and over?
Oh, yeah.
Well, now you've got basically our total culture coming apart at the seams. We've got our borders being flooded, and this is such a heinous and egregious, those are two words that don't even encapsulate the fullest power of emotion, events that have ever taken place. And one of the things that and this is something that's interesting, if you look at the pressure on the West to have birth control, meaning the United States of America primarily, and one of the offshoots, by the way, guys, of the birth control push for, and listen, let's make it clear, this was designed as a form of eugenics to basically take away the white man. It's not a racist statement. It's actually in their writings, and to basically overwhelm the conquered land with people whose origin was different than that which they conquered. For instance, even Genghis Khan, when he went in and took over any of his conquests or any of the Chinese, everybody, and the Turks were famous for this in their, Armenian slaughter, but they always raped the women in order to plant seed for the next generation to wipe out the previous generation. I'm encapsulating a whole lot of history, but there is nothing new under the sun. So tonight I pray, and I've talked to V, and I've truly prayed, and the intercessors are praying, that people will understand what the death of the dollar means. I think that V has expressed frustration. I'll let him speak for himself right now. And I have expressed my frustration. How do we make it real so everyone can understand? They certainly don't get it at 29% inflation food prices. They're certainly not getting it with the unemployment. And I'm not talking about our listeners. I'm talking about on a national level, because they continue to allow the brain perversion called network news to basically destroy their minds. And that's why Hillary's on her high horse. I forget which one she's piggyback riding of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but she's probably on jumping between them all. The point is that they have to shut down the alternate news, such as Hagman and Hagman, InfoWars, whoever's out there, Dave Hodges, the people that are out there speaking and trying to get people informed. And here's the frustration, then it's to you, V, immediately. How do you get people to care about their lives who don't, number one, even believe their lives are in the crosshairs, let alone their children or grandchildren? So this is what we're talking about, the baton death march of the dollar, because before it finally dies, the slaughter, the execution, the suicide, the hopelessness, the despair, the tale of tears, or excuse me, the trail of tears will become the tale of tears. And this is the thing that Jesus spoke about when he said men's hearts failing them for looking after those things coming up on the earth. So V, share, if you will, and I'm saying, brother, bottom line it on what the death of the dollar means, because we've got important dates coming up. Go ahead, V.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Doug and Joe, for having me on. I just want to thank the listeners for tuning in. I mean, it's Wednesday night. You could be watching something else, listening to something else. You could be engaged in doing something else. But I just want to thank all of you for tuning in, and I think it's very important going forward as the days falls off the calendar, and as we are going from week to week here and approaching a lot of very key important dates. Oftentimes I say that we as Americans, we're more reactive than proactive. We're reactive. Think about it. Think about it for a second. In every aspect, we are always looking for somebody else to take care of things for us. You're in trouble. There's a home break-in. What do? You call the cops. You come into money. You got somebody gives you $100,000 as an inheritance. What do? Oh, you call a financial planner. You don't take the time to learn the stuff. You just trust that he'll take care of it for you. Your car breaks down, you need an oil change, you take it to somebody else. So we've built up for the last 50 some odd years, because of this, at that time, a great economy we've had, a very service-oriented economy and existence, where somebody else is always pretty much wiping our rear ends, okay? So we've had that primarily because we've had the luxury of the dollar as the world reserve currency. So, if other nations wanted to buy food, if they wanted to buy oil, whatever, staple they needed to purchase, they needed to first buy dollars. And so we've had the benefit of exporting a lot of our inflation. We've had the benefit of living off the hog, so to speak, because of all the wonderful benefits of having and being a world reserve currency. So we've enjoyed that for quite some time, for over 50 years, and ever since Nixon took us off the gold standard and allowed the currency to float, we've had a widespread 40-year run with many nations of the world pegging the value of their currency to the dollar. So we had it good, folks. We've had it good for a long time. But now there is a complete global realignment. Now it's no longer is the dollar a wonderful investment? Because many nations, they've started to realize that, number one, we're corrupt. And I've said many times before that we are being vetted as the source of all the problems of the world. You might say to yourself, well, what do you mean we're the source of the problems? That sounds very un-American. Folks, first of all, look, we're vetted. We're the source of all the stock market fraud, all the high-frequency trading, with all the manipulated numbers, with all the fraud that's going on, with all the bail-ins and bailouts, all the stimulus, all the TARP, all the junk, all the toxicity. We're the source. We're the source of all the bond fraud. I mean, who else buys their own debt? Which country whose central bank buys, apart from Japan, buys over 70-some-odd% of their nation's debt? I mean, we do. So we're also the source of all the real estate fraud. And look at MERS. Look at all the stuff that Greg Moores has uncovered with his 6-year investigation into the whole entire MERS scandal. Okay, with the absolute destruction in titles, for mortgages. So we're cited as fraud for that. We're basically also the vetted as the death dealers of the world. We get caught in Syria funding terrorists. We get caught in Ukraine funding neo-Nazis. We get caught in Iraq funding terrorists. We get caught in Afghanistan doing narco-trafficking. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So the rest of the world, even though we in America and as Americans, even though we haven't fully, I'm not talking about the listeners here again, I'm talking about the general populace. Even though the general populace hasn't woken up to the idea that, hey, that they're living in a very, very corrupt and criminal government, the rest of the world has. And the rest of the world has decided, hey, you know what, we don't want anything to do with these guys. We don't want anything to do with a bunch of guys who are just outlandish criminals. They're crazy and reckless, and they're printing money to oblivion. So now the rest of the world has decided that they're going to form trade unions. They're going to form trade zones. And the U.S. is not invited. That's a big problem. That's a huge problem. What the death of the dollar simply means, okay, to every person listening to my voice, is pretty much the end of the way of your life. I'm not saying your life is going to end. I'm just saying the way you know how things are currently, your lifestyle, your quality of life, it's going to be over, okay, because you've based your existence on something that's imaginary. You've lived the fantasy lifestyle in a phantom growth economy, in a bubble that's been blowing for a long time. And now it can't be blown any further, so it's going to pop. So that's what it means, folks. Okay, the end of the dollar. All right, and unfortunately, we don't make anything in this country anymore. The only, I told you many times, the biggest exports we have right now, trash, recyclables, and pornography. That's what we produce. Okay, and that's what we export throughout the world. Okay, I mean, it's a joke. So there's nothing in terms of a factory floor that's going to bring us back up out of this mess that we're going to go into. So when you look at all the hard numbers and all these facts, this is what's pretty much been staring us in the face, guys. It's the end of our way of life. We're going to see rampant poverty, levels we've never seen before. We're going to see people go hungry in ways we've never seen before. We're going to see an absolute broken down government, okay, and a government that where there's no functioning social system, okay. You might have a security apparatus with this quote-unquote police state in operation in various places throughout the country, but even then it's going to be fragmented because how are you going to pay these guys? And with what are you going to pay these guys? So there's going to be enough destabilization here in the United States that there is a very strong chance, and the powers that be have actually, they're actually hoping that there's enough chaos here amongst the citizenry that eventually they'll call in some quote unquote NATO or UN troops to come in and keep the peace, so to speak. So these are the things that we're facing, and these are the things that we're heading into as we're going into the month of July. It's a very, very critical month. So, this program, I just want to detail for you folks a little bit more about what we talked about. I want to highlight to you some key bits of information, like even today when I was talking to Steve earlier, right before I got on the program, I actually got an email from a gentleman, my buddy TJ Tom over in Jersey. He sent me an email with what London is going to be doing. And then that was followed up with a confirmation from the City of London sources that I have. They confirmed it, and it was actually something that me and W deliberated on a couple of weeks ago. And he actually pitched the concept, and damn it, it came true. So tonight I'm going to share with you guys and build on the previous shows that me and Steve have done, but also highlight some things and some key bits of information that me and W have talked about, and coincided with a little cherry on top with the latest information that I just got from the City of London. Steve, over to you.
It's important that people recognize that the meeting that's coming up on, I believe, the 15th with the 105 nations, I asked V a very important question, and it's one that a dear friend of mine asked me last night, and V will address it tonight, the two-tier currency. But I think what's most important for everyone to understand, everybody has been shaking their head asking, well, why are we printing money like there's no tomorrow? Because the powers that be, the devils that are, actually are going to, how do I say this, totally devastate the U.S. dollar. They've built up are in the process of building up the middle class in China. What could be better than 100 million people with credit cards? How about 500 million people? You see, ladies and gentlemen, it's why usury, or the charging of interest, is always so wrong, and it's why the scriptures teach that the borrower is servant to the lender. Now, let's look at this in a global perspective right now. We've got an Islamic, the Islamic apocalypse going on. Let's look at what's happened to Sudan, in Syria, in Iraq, in Saudi Arabia, in Kenya, in Malaysia, Central African Republic, Nigeria. And what's central to all of these hotspots that's influencing the dollar's demise on purpose, and the literal arming of every antagonist towards the American language, the American culture, our American borders, our American freedoms, and most importantly, the God of heaven. See, this is a spiritual war, and it's a spiritual war, and like V on all of his emails always quotes the statement about central bankers. Listen, the point that most people don't understand is even when Jesus was dealing with issues, you could not separate the power of the purse from the power of the state, from the religious control of the day. Let me make that clear. The power of the purse, the power of the state, in this case Rome with the subservient, willing lackeys and the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin, but you could not separate it. That's why Jesus said, my Father's house is to be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the control of money and the control of power. With the control of money comes the power, and all evil, all, A-L-L, evil, flows from that. Remember what Satan tried to tempt Jesus when Jesus was in the wilderness, and obviously he was taken up into the pinnacle, and the devil himself said, all these kingdoms will I give to you. Well, obviously until Jesus was crucified and he laid down his life and took it up again, and those kingdoms of the earth had become the kingdoms of our God once again by the blood of the Lamb. You see, people don't take the Word of God seriously. People don't take the events of the day seriously, and it's like we're in a giant dream state, and we're all going to awaken to the most devastating real reality. It's one thing when Syrian kids are being butchered and gutted. It's another thing when Syrian Christians are being beheaded and dismembered and their body parts sold on the meat markets. It's one thing to turn on YouTube videos and see literally, 10 or 12 Syrians. Some people say they were military guys. Some people say they were Syrian Christians. That's not the issue. The issue is these men were cold-blooded, shot in the head, and then their bodies were riddled with machine gun fire. We're watching people being beheaded in real time, and all we get out of the mainstream three-ring circus on what I call, what is circus ridiculous is, and now I'm talking about the majority of Christian TV is not addressing this and is not preparing the people of the United States. You see, Christians in America have abdicated. Now listen to me. They have abdicated their calling and their anointing that they once possessed to be the salt of the earth. We've already gone through those scriptures so many times. But did you ever stop to think that the bushel that you've hid your light under is the very four walls and a steeple? And I think it was a wake-up call. And, V, this is one of the most disturbing things that I've ever experienced, Doug and Joe, in putting up the alerts on my website when we had an AC-130 gunship, Puff the Magic Dragon, in other words, a weapon of, I would say, conventional mass destruction, talking about how they're training on firing on churches and the people, men, women, and children coming out of it. The brutality of that, Doug, went into the realm of just people just disbelieved. I think they think that there are people who really love this country that have nothing better to do than to join their, group hallucination. So the point is that now where all this fits together, and here's where the whole, quote, Megillah is, all terrorism is a financial venture of a power structure behind the scenes orchestrating chaos, terror, and horror in order for them to subjugate the people and to take away everything that you have and then give you, an orange or an orange peel in its place. So this is what we're dealing with tonight. We are specifically dealing with the destruction of the U.S. dollar. Now, I want to just make this, I guess you'd say, segue. It's important that you understand that as the dollar is destroyed, the intent is to destroy you. I want you to say that. As the dollar is destroyed, their intent is to destroy me. Say it about 3 or 4 times, as many times as it takes until you get it. Oh, now I get it. Until the light goes on, because we can pump all the juice we try and believe God for. We do believe God for all of our contacts. We're pulling in as many favors as we can be given, and God in His grace is granting us information coming in on such a massive scale that unless we sort out and prioritize the information, people cannot follow it, and that's what is critical tonight. So saying that, it's imperative that you understand that, and Doug, you know the date, forgive me, but it was about 33 days ago that B was on, and he said 33 days it would start. The metals would start to rise. Obviously, we had a $1.04 run up in silver that day, and a $45.67 run up in gold that day. And listen, if it was off a day or two, forget it. At least what comes to pass, I mean, how many times have we heard 88 reasons a rapture is going to happen in 1988, and then it's every other year, it's this month, next month, rapture ready. It's all insanity, because the point being is those Christians in Syria love God as much as any of us do. Those little people in Syria, Christian children, that are being slaughtered and mutilated, they're the children of the King. But again, until the horror comes here, where you smell the stench of death, and I want to get into that later, And until you see bodies being torn apart by feral dogs or the animals that come in, it will not register. And the reason it will not register, because if it did register, nobody could sit in church with a dry eye in quote-unquote a worship service, hating their brother, writing what they write about Christians that are trying to sound the alarm. This isn't just about me. This is about everybody. And the deal is, and the people say, you know, the crybabies. If I had to come up with a new thing, and then Sheila Zielinski will love this statement, if I had to come up with a new way of rating, I would call it the crybaby factor, okay? Because you and I deal with crybabies every day. Is that kind of accurate? Would you say, and I'm talking now as it relates to people financially, and usually they're trying to whine and give you 100 reasons why the one reason you're trying to protect them isn't right. Well, they don't have time, and, you know, what will this mean in my retirement? I'll tell you what it means. If you don't take control of your money, look at the videos where the ISIS, and we should define that later too, but ISIS goes down a row and blows everybody's brains out. Ladies and gentlemen, never has the world seen such a gross violation of human rights, human slaughter, let's call it what it is, human sacrifice, and the complete contempt for lives of men, women, and children. And the feminazis and the women who always wanted women's rights, they don't say one bloody word, or they give token service to let the Nigerian girls go free, you know, and then probably go back out and snort the line of cocaine. I'm not saying all of them do that, but I personally know that they do that, some of them, because they tell me that. You see, ladies and gentlemen, there is a dilemma, and the dilemma you're faced with, I'm faced with, and we're all faced with tonight is, what do we believe anymore? And more than importantly, what will we stand for anymore? And if we won't stand for anything, then basically what will happen? What will then happen to the people that have failed to stand up for the Lord? Just like that poor Muslim guy or Christian that was shown on YouTube. He was a Christian, then they made him say that there's no God but Allah, and then they killed him anyway, you know? I think there should be a new stand your streets of gold position where, let's face it, the bottom line is we don't have the faith we have because everybody was watching Dancing with the Stars. They were worshiping the King of Glory, the living God who made the stars. Go ahead, V.
Yeah, absolutely, folks. I mean, there's so many things going on. You know, if I were to highlight for all of you guys and put things in perspective, the situation in Iraq, the situation that's got re-inflamed, so to speak, in Iraq, the situation in Syria, the situation in Ukraine, all these things are connected, okay? And you might say to yourself, well, you know, on the surface it looks like a whole bunch of terrorists are coming through from the Syrian border and getting into Iraq. And that's just a surface issue. You delve a little deeper and you find out who the heck ISIS really is. They are a CIA-trained Western intelligence operation that was originally designed to go in and destabilize Syria. This is when these same morons try to go into Syria, try to blow up hospitals, machine gun crowds of protesters, and blame it on Assad. It's basically, folks, what we're seeing is Operation Ajax repackaged. Okay, and I'm not going to go into details of Operation Ajax. You can Google it and read it yourself. But that's what it is, Operation Ajax repackaged. Okay, so when it didn't work in Syria, okay, when it didn't fizzle out exactly the way they wanted to because they got absolutely blocked at that point by the Russians and the Chinese. Okay, because I'm going to tell you how this all fits in, and you'll see the big picture. When they got blocked over there, that whole, and I told you, the whole Syria situation is a pipeline deal. Okay, it is about Gazprom. It is about the oil wars. It is about Iran. It's about the Eurasian trade zone. It's about the European energy market. Okay, it's about stopping Russia. So when the Syria situation failed, they launched Ukraine. Okay, and then the Ukraine situation is really, again, starting to fizzle excuse me, and fall apart. And we're seeing and I gave you guys the terms of the IMF agreements where they're really trying to cause Ukraine to go to war with the Russians. And I'm telling you right now, that's not going to work, okay? So now they re-scuttled the whole entire operation, and they're bringing it back into Iraq to destabilize Iraq. Well, what the heck was going on in Iraq? Well, as soon as the U.S. pulled out, the Shiite majority, okay, because for the longest time under Saddam, the Sunnis kind of ruled Iraq, and the Baptists were the primary party that controlled it. So when the Shiites regained control of Iraq, well, they cozied up to their Shiite allies. Now, who happens to be that? Well, it happens to be Iran, okay? And the proposed pipeline deal is to cut from Iran through Iraq on into Syria, into the Mediterranean, up into the European markets. That's what this whole thing is about, okay? It is to stop that from happening. Now, we talk about the moves and the counter moves between the Russians and the Americans and the U.S. government, okay? One of the things that we often forget is China, all right? People in this whole entire debate between Russia and America, people tend to forget the 8,000-pound dragon sitting in the living room. People fail to recognize that China does over $300 billion a year in trade with the Middle East. There is no way that the Chinese were going to sit idly by and allow the Americans, these neo-Satanists that are running this country, to run roughshod in the Middle East. They're just not going to allow that, okay? They're not going to sit there and put their national security at risk. So you're going to see the Chinese work even very closely with the Russians. And so far, they've been not doing this militarily. They've been doing very proxy-like, funding the existing governments, building relationships. What do you mean by building relationships? Well, look at the current government in Iraq. They're pretty much being thrown to the wolves by the Americans. It is at this juncture, who's stepping into that vacuum? Well, it's Vladimir Putin. In fact, last week they said, hey, we support the Iraqi government in defeating these terrorists that are attacking their nation and their capital, and we're going to go ahead and help you guys out, because they understand that this is a diplomacy war. And the time for military action will come. They'll get to that point. But they're going to make sure that the U.S. exhausts their resources, their time in 3 death traps: Syria, Ukraine, Iraq. Okay? While this is happening, the U.S. is also being outplayed in the financial markets. They're being outplayed economically. Okay? We talked about the bond dumping that's going on. Why? Well, the rest of the countries are waking up. They're like, hey, we don't need to have U.S. dollars anymore. And folks, this is what I've talked about before. Okay, how many times have I told everybody listening in, hey, for the last year or 2 to 3 years, for the last 2 or 3 years, you've had 24 of the largest economies in the world setting up currency swaps amongst themselves, using the Chinese yuan as settlement, or the Russian ruble, or whatever currency, to trade amongst themselves and bypassing the dollar. And this theme, this we don't need a dollar theme, has kind of caught on with the rest of the world. It's become very, not only just fashionable, but beneficial because of the U.S. action. So you have right now the vast majority of the nations of the world are currently dumping the dollar. Now you might ask yourself, well, if they're dumping the dollar, they're dumping the bonds, how come it's not being reflected in the bond market? Now, I don't need to remind you all that the bond market is a fraud. It's totally rigged. It's totally bogus, okay? So where's all the bonds? Where's all the funds? Well, it's in Euroclear. I kind of highlighted it before that Euroclear is pretty much the dumping grounds. It's the junkyard of the U.S. Treasuries, and that's where it's going. Now, it was officially said that Euroclear has anywhere between 300 to 500 billion U.S. bonds currently. It's not. It's actually a lot more. Euroclear has over 1 trillion, probably close to 1.3 to 1.5 trillion in bonds currently. Now you might ask yourself, where the hell did that come from? Where did that come from? Well, here's the answer for you folks. Oftentimes over the past 18 months, you've probably heard me say the terminology BRICS. The BRICS banks, the BRICS trading zone of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. do not make the mistake of limiting BRICS to the 5 nations that make up that acronym. When you hear the word BRICS, folks, it's not those 5 countries there. What BRICS is a grouping of over 105 nations. Okay, 105 nations who have, for the last 7 years, have been working together in order to create a partnership, infrastructure, banking, networking, non-centric U.S. economic functions and activities. Okay, non-U.S. centric. So they've been doing this since 2008. That was the alarm bell. The stock market collapse of 2008. So they've been at this for a while. And that's what this whole thing's about. So when you see moves, when you see the absolute death dealing, because that's the only thing these neo-Satanists in the United States know how to do. Death and destruction. That's actually the biggest export we do. So when they see these death dealers funding ISIS, going on ahead into Iraq, into Syria, and all these places, creating this destabilization, okay, they love that stuff. So that's one level. Okay, that's the real level of what's going on. Above that is, you have the whole spiritual aspect of it, the whole blood sacrifices, bloodshed, chaos, death, and destruction, and how it feeds those specific energies into the specific entities who suck that up like vampires. That's the other aspect of this whole entire thing. But in terms of economics, let's not forget, this is a war that the United States is doing against the Russians, against the Chinese, against all these trade zones that have come together and decided to kick the United States out. That have come together and said, you know what, you guys are going to be on the outside looking in. You're no longer going to be a part of our network. You're no longer going to partake of our dealings. But you will be forever ostracized, vilified, cast out, rejected. And that's where we are today as a nation. So if the world is putting us off, and we have no more business and economic dealings, no more world reserve currency, that pretty much cuts the legs from right underneath us as a nation. And when that happens, you take that and coincide it with the fact you have a nation that's printing money without end, just absolutely, unequivocally just devaluing the dollar. Let's call quantitative easing for what it is. It's a devaluation. They're debasing their currency. You're going to see hyperinflationary hell come to these shores, because all those dollars that's being held back by all these little junkyards, okay, the DTCC, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of Japan, Euroclear, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, all these little hidey holes that they've been stuffing treasury bonds in, that's all going to pop with them. And all these dollars are going to start flooding back into the market. At which point, folks, it's going to be rapid. It's going to be absolutely a rapid ratcheting of inflation within the United States. And that is something that 99% of Americans are not ready for. They're not thinking about it. They're not talking about it. You got these quote-unquote intellectuals, and for some strange reason, it always seems to be intellectuals. They're worried about deflation. I mean, it's insanity, okay? So these things are coming through, and they will not be stopped. These are the last death rattles of a dying jackal, which is the United States government, and it is the baton death march of the United States dollar. What do I mean by that? Well, the dollar is something that's been taken captive, just like those POWs in Bataan. They've been taken captive. And since it's been taken captive in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act, okay? So all the way to 2014, it's been a very long death march. And through those 100 years, folks, the dollar has lost 98% of its value versus gold. The dollar has lost 97% of its value versus silver. And now it's going to lose the last remaining 2 to 3% completely. And that's what we're here warning you about, okay? That's what you want to focus about. Now, What's it going to take? Are you going to sit there and be reactive and wait for these things to happen and say, well, you know, V and W and Steve and these guys, they talk about July, they talk about this, and maybe it might not happen, maybe it will, who knows, maybe I'll just wait and see. Folks, look at where silver is. Just as we said it, when you have men who have skin in the game, who've come to you and say, hey, you know what, this and this is going to happen, and it does, and it happens successively over and over again every time they talk about it, you need to listen. 18 months in, we haven't been wrong. 18 months in, look at where we are today from 18 months ago. Do you even recognize your own country? Do you even recognize who we are anymore as a nation? I sure don't. I absolutely don't, because I know where the next 18 months is headed. The first 18 months that brought us to this direction has been an incredible successive string of events. We went from a time where you had something happen in once every couple of months or a couple of years to now it's almost every week, almost every day. The news cycles are constantly coming out. I write articles from my website. I'm in the middle of writing an article. I got to scrap it because now there's more information coming out. I've never had anything like this happen before. That's how bad it is, folks. That's how intense. That's how acute the frequency of events are taking place, and all the data and all this frequency of events is pointing towards one thing: a dollar debt, an economic collapse, a massive transitionary period. And you might say to yourself, well, what does a transitionary period look like? Well, folks, we have over 800 years of human economic data at our fingertips that we can pull from. Let's look at the last collapse. Let's look at the last depression we went through in 1933. What happened? 7.5 million people starved to death. You know, people talk about, oh, the market was down X amount of points, there was 25% unemployment, there was this number and this fact and that fact. But the one fact that has always hit home with me when I was a young trader was there were 7.5 million people starved to death at a time when the majority of the population lived in the rural countryside and on farms. It was unfathomable to me. Absolutely unfathomable. Think about today. You have the dollar dries up, credit dries up, commercial paper completely destroyed. What happens? What happens to distribution? What happens to food? What happens to transportation and trade? That all ceases, comes to a scorching halt. So look at the population demographics. More people live in suburbs and in the cities than they do on farms in the rural countryside. So can you imagine what the effect would be? But I'm telling you, folks, the first 60 to 90 days of this whole thing going off, it's going to be hell on earth. It's going to be absolutely. It's going to be absolutely crime busters, pretty much outside. It's going to be insane, and that's what we're trying to get people ready for. This is not a matter of if. It's when. It's when. And the track record shows it. The data is screaming. The direction we're heading. It's when. And that when, and W gave us that big clue, and my sources at the City of London gave a big clue as well. It's happening. Steve.
It's not only happening, but it's interesting that what's going on right now in Iraq, spreading into Syria, spreading into the whole world. Most people don't know what the name ISIS means. Now, it's important to understand that, again, the two protectors of the City of London are Gog and Magog, the giants, okay? And B, you and I, when we first started on the radio, I said there's something more to the protectorates, and Google it and find out, or use whatever search engine, Firefox, whoever you're using, Startpage, Quayle, whoever. But go and look up Gog and Magog, the protectors of the City of London. Now, why is this important? Listen to this. First of all, Isis means throne, and her literal headdress is a throne. And what most people have never put together, except they had a really bright listener of ours, send me an email. Do people realize that this could be the very harlot that rides the beast? In ancient Greece, and this is something that's amazing, and both Egyptian and Greek, the religious beliefs, they basically worshipped her as the ideal mother and wife, as well as a patroness of nature and magic. We've got huge blood sacrifices going on all over the world, but why did they use that name Isis? I believe, as everything else, it is the Illuminati signal that they are ready to enthrone, literally, the harlot that rides the beast. The beast obviously can be the system as well as an individual, but the beast is something that takes on. A beast is usually composed of different parts, but the sole purpose of the beast is to consume humanity. And so we had the entire, if you will, we had Anubis, the Egyptian god. Now, this is critical that people understand this, because this goes exactly to what V is going to talk about the City of London and the control of the world. Years ago, V, and I'm talking 20 years ago, started talking about just the control of the Egyptian and what I would call the lineage of the pharaohs, and I'm talking about the time before the northern and the southern kingdom of Egypt, even that which most Egyptologists and everybody lays claim to. I'm talking about the time, if you will, the golden age. And so what's interesting now is that when you deal with borders, language, and culture, the idols that have come into America are such a flagrant neon light, and I say neon because that's one of the brightest ways to get a sign, isn't to light it from the front, but to light it with neon, because the gas gets charged, i.e. the neon gas, with an electrical charge, and all those really cool neon lights are bright. Well, let's just say this, that when this group that's funded, and V just laid it out, who's paying their way, like I said earlier, all terrorists are funded by somebody as an extension of their power that usually enables the funding entity to stay in the background. Well, this time it's so obvious that there's no way for the intelligence agencies to stay in the background. It's in your face. So ISIS could literally be the harlot that rides the beast. And as you're looking, now remember, ISIS's name means throne. And what are we watching now? Even on television, one of the most, and I'm not saying anybody watches this or should, but I'm just saying one of those popular shows that's ever been on TV is called Game of Thrones. And it's a war between kingdoms. But you know, in that movie, I watched one episode because there were giants in it, okay? There were also cannibals. So why do I bring this up right now in a financial talk? Because, ladies and gentlemen, the very giants that control the world from behind the scenes, I'm not only talking financial ones, I'm talking about the real ones. I'm talking about literally what Russ Dizdar and others are trying to warn about, literally angelic entities controlling the world. And for the record, Satan is a great economist. Good night. He's got a whole realm of nonsense math out there in the world running the world. And so the point is that ISIS means throne. So we've got the woman that rides the beast, Isis. The beast is a system. The beast is to devour you. What is the number one target of everybody's everything, any place in the world? It doesn't matter if it's Kenya. It doesn't matter if it's Indonesia. It doesn't matter if it's the Philippines. It doesn't matter if it's Iraq. It doesn't matter if it's Syria, Sudan. What is it? The Christian. Hello, even you non-Christians out there who are absolutely shaking your heads, you ought to get this, because money is power. And that power that the money brings is control. And every time everybody, V, that's listening to us, Doug and Joe, goes to the supermarket, you should hold it up your ear and hear the mocking, and I'm not saying, well, maybe they're doing it now, but I'm saying you could almost see like the mocking when ground round goes from $2.99 or $3.99 a pound to $5.99 a pound, or when bacon goes from $4.99 to $9.99 a pound. I don't care how they figure their math. In my mind, that's just doubled. So every time you pay more for gas, every time you pay more for food, every time you need to acquire something that costs you more, there's a mocking sound coming from the sales receipt or the invoice. And basically they're saying, we got you. And at this point they do. And so when they who see you as termites, they see you as animals, just as a Japanese thought of. And we don't have the time to go into the shogun mentality and the Bushido and the rules of Japan and feudal Japan then coming into the 20th century. But suffice it to say, if you weren't a Japanese, you were a dog. That sounds like somebody else's religion. Infidels are not dogs. Well, yet we're called dogs. And who are dogs to the world that's now on fire with a cause? Well, it's Christians. You see, identify, vilify, nullify, destroy. We're beyond the first things. I remember V talking about this stuff when I first started talk radio. The identity was going on, or the identifying. Then the vilification came over a decade. Then the nullification came, and now basically it's death. Identify, vilify, nullify, destroy. Well, isn't it interesting that one of Satan's names is Abaddon, or the destroyer? And isn't it interesting, ladies and gentlemen, that beyond pornography, the other major export of the United States is, and you're going to love this, is obviously military supplies. Murder is big business. Bribery is control. Every single nation in the world, and I would say in the next 90 days, and you can correct me, V, and I'm not setting dates on this, but you're already seeing Poland basically saying having the United States as an ally is worthless. Did you see that, V? V? Hello, Doug?
Yes, absolutely. I apologize.
Okay, I just don't know when we're on or off, but here's the thing. We said this, and again, putting everything into perspective, V just gave you a remarkable, several-minute overview. You ought to listen to us, not because it's V, not because it's Steve, but look, judge what has come to pass, as Doug opened this show. Judge what we're telling you is going to come to pass. All of the illustrations, metaphors, and symbols now in the book of Revelation have a literal out-picturing and fulfillment to the chagrin of the preterists, okay? The point being is that this stuff is happening. So why is it, ladies and gentlemen, I just say this, why is the biggest terrorist movement funded by the United States and others that is setting the total destruction of Christians, why would they name it ISIS? I'll tell you why. One word, Jerusalem. And that Jerusalem is the city of the great king. That's Jesus. He's coming back. But before Jesus comes back, there will be a literal personage by the name of Antichrist. And V, I've tried to teach this, and the same thing to Doug and Joe. The Christian's body is the temple of the Holy Ghost. When I hear Christians saying, I just can't wait for the temple to be built in Jerusalem, and they just found a red heifer, blah, 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 I said, do you understand who's going to come there first? I said, Jesus, the Word of God taught that the Lord is going to dwell in a temple not made with hands. Sure, there will be a temple literal at some point, but the Christians tend to, how do I say this, outsource or outpicture what they believe is going to be the case and deny any evidence to the contrary. For instance, everyone said, well, Rome is the mother of harlots that rides the beast. No, just part of the equation. It's all the Jews' fault. That's what they say. No, it's all the white Christians' fault. No, the enemy is using his people in all shapes, sizes, and forms. I tell people, color of skin means nothing to me, but the color of a man's heart means everything to me. And I'm talking black-hearted individuals, and I'm talking about people that absolutely have been chomping at the bit to get their payback. I once asked a very prominent, and I've told you about this, CIA guy who was an assassin, very famous, he's known in the agency, absolutely, was stellar in his ability to get things done. And I said, why is it that you guys, because he admitted being raised in an Illuminati family, I said, why is it you guys go around cutting everybody's head off? And he says it's payback for Genesis 3:15. And so, ladies and gentlemen, remember that. You may not even we got skeptics and scoffers, V, that, don't believe in Genesis. They don't believe in everything, but supposedly, like Pastor Langford said, by the time you get through with what they don't believe, they're doing even their own self-conscious a great disservice, because they don't believe anything that they claim to believe, and in functioning, they don't practice what they believe. So we're here tonight to give you a heads up. There is a plan for a one-world government. Doug, you watched this. Tom Horn and I talked about it. Chris Putnam talked about it with you on your show. We've talked about one world government. Man, the United Nations in high gear. We've talked about the Pope and his secret memos bringing Chrislam. And I can say this. That's a travesty. It's heresy. And the Lord God of heaven rained fire down from his heaven in his holy anger and indignation. And what are we seeing now? We're seeing the Temple of One in Germany. Did you guys all see that? The One is the Eye of Horus, and he is coming to earth. He's already present in his disciples, in his followers, in his fallen angels, in his disembodied spirits, but he literally shows up on the scene, and that's who's coming into the temple. So the Game of Thrones through ISIS is the challenge for the seat of the great king, the Lord Jesus Christ, in the fair land. And I'm not going to argue with anybody. The bottom line is that literally Dave Flynn proved beyond a shadow of a doubt, and there were even skeptics when Flynn's genius was challenged by gerbil mentalities. You guys know what gerbil mentalities are? They're people that would spin and spin and spin on a hamster wheel and never get off the hamster wheel long enough to basically see that why argue with what's so factual? The point being is people hate the fact that someday Jesus is going to rule and reign on earth for 1,000 years. That's called the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. And so the powers that be, the Illuminati, will do everything and anything using the power of this world, and the power of this world is the money of this world. So when V gives you, and hear me good on this, nobody else on talk radio ever said anything about City of London and what was going on before V did. Nobody did. Did they, Doug?
No, sir. No, you guys were the first out of the gate with that. And again, I go back to the premiere broadcast back in January of last year, and talking about the nuances that relate to the City of London. And you know what, Steve? It's my belief, based on my research, that the Antichrist will come out of that power structure. No, that's just my belief based on my research. But so all of this is connected. And by the way, you mentioned ISIS. When you and Tom Horn were on, and I did go back to verify this. This was about a year ago. It was in February of 2013. You folks, you and Mr. Horn had talked about the book Apollyon Rising, among other things, and ISIS is prominent in that book, at least ISIS in the context of Apollyon, Horus, and Osiris, and so on. So the names mean things, I guess is what I'm saying.
They certainly do. And maybe we should take the break. But, V, when we come back, will you address, please, and I don't know if you want to do it now or wait later, but I want you to address a two-tier currency, because that's being floated. And I believe your sources said it will exist for a while, but it will have issues and problems. So is it good to take a break now, Doug? And then, because I want to let V go unencumbered.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll take the break right now. Folks, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on this Wednesday, June 25th, 2014, with our very special guest, Steve Quayle. His website is stevequayle.com, and the Guerrilla Economist V, his website, roguemoney.net. Bookmark those sites if you have not already. and keep them handy as they're full of information that is timely and very important. We'll be right back after these short messages.
Well, I know our audience can handle the truth, and they do every night. We broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Of course, you can find us home base, HomelandSecurityUS.com. We're also simulcast by the Christians United Broadcasting Network. There, tune us in at the Hagman and HagmanReport.com. But tonight, folks, we have a very special program with the two brothers. I consider them brothers. I really do. Steve Quayle from SteveQuayle.com, V, the Guerrilla Economist, RogueMoney.net. Folks, listen to both Steve and V, the Guerrilla Economist, please. And you know, I know when we're getting over the target talking about sensitive subjects, when the emails come in and say, oh, you guys, again, this doom porn, this fear porn, shut up already.
That's why I leave my email off during these shows.
Well, I tell you what. Look, the fruits, by their fruits you shall know them. And certainly Mr. Quayle and Mr. Guerrilla Economist, I almost did it again.
Hey, Doug, I want to address that and then turn the media over to V. Good news is for all detractors, why in the hell do they listen? And I'm saying that truthfully, okay? I've had this talk with V, and by the grace of God, he agrees to come on one more time. But the doom porn and all that stuff, I rebuke those people in Jesus' name. Where were they standing up for the people being slaughtered and butchered and murdered? Where were they? Where are they? Who are they? They're probably locked away in Northcom just generating dumbass emails, and that is a biblical word. A few more words in the scripture, and I have my whole vocabulary covered. But the point being is that every day it's incessant, doom porn, doom porn. The country is gone. The country that you've loved, that our fathers fought for. Veterans are next to dogs. 1,000 of them have died because of everything that's gone on and not going on. That's just 1,000 they admit to. Christians are vilified. So when I hear doom porn, I had a lady send me an email. I want to just deal with this because it needs to be said, saying, I read something on the internet about you. You're not even a Christian. She was taking me on for Genesis 6. I had all I could do not to tell her, well, I won't even go there, not to tell her what she was. I rebuked her, and then I let it alone. But I just got him. I get some guy who keeps telling me, he's in Alaska, I won't embarrass him, David. He keeps sending me an email over and over, forget about all this stuff, you guys. The asteroid's going to slam into the earth near Puerto Rico. The above event will soon bring the world's economies to its knees. ISIS, Iraq, Syria, Ukraine, Federal Reserve, the Illuminati. Obama is not needed. Only God will get the glory. It is the glory of God, David, to reveal a matter ahead of time. Surely the Lord God will do nothing except he reveals his secrets to his servants, the prophets. The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Let the prophets speak and the other prophets judge. The bottom line is that what V and I are doing, look, we don't have to do it. And seriously, and V, is this not a true statement? Do I not say to you all the time, it's not worth it anymore? And then I get convicted by the Lord, and for those last people, and see, it's not fair to punish everybody, but Doug, when you say doom porn or fear-mongering or anything like that, the bottom line is that those are people that say nothing, do nothing. They don't feed the homeless. They don't win anybody to Jesus. Tell me, how many people have you won to Jesus, David? Tell me, oh woman of great mockery, what have you done? Romy Zerat and I have a wonderful thing in common. We both have seen, I would say, the personification of evil spirits. They'll argue everything, but they'll never do anything. They'll argue every point, because they've got to be right. They'll never reach out a hand to help anybody. So basically, and somebody says, you shouldn't have to defend yourself. I'm defending the gospel. What are you defending, you cowardly sucks? I'm sorry. I am defending the very thing. I'm fighting. We come on the radio, Pastor Langford and I. We all come on to try and stop. We try and put a roadblock in, and some people say God will. I said, well, that works for the world of Islam. It doesn't work for the Christian, because my Bible says that God looked for a man who was an intercessor to stand in the gap and make up the hedge. And I got to tell you something. The hardest thing for me to do is to pray for those kind of people. But I do. I say, oh, Lord, take the scales off their eyes. With that, V, let's give them one more time. And you know what, V? I really pray under my breath tonight, and I'll say it audibly, I really pray that you and I don't ever have to discuss this subject again, because the people that will get it, now I'm talking about, we've got, 3, 4, 5 million listeners by the time this show's downloaded, and most of them know it. But the point is that tell the people what, if you would, sir, what the latest intel is, so one more time you can go on record. And then can I tell you this? If they reject it, fine. Reject me. Say all the sorts of things you say. It's not just me. It's anybody that tells you the truth is an enemy of those who have demon issues. And then you need to get a hold of John Quayle or somebody that can get you free, because those of you who continually fight the truth, you're kicking against the pricks, okay? That means you're literally running your feet into the thorns, and you know that you could quit doing that if you just step out of the way and listen. And, Doug, all I'd say is, why do those people listen? They listen because whether they hate us, they love us, they mock us, they belittle us, they slam us, they scorn us. The bottom line is they listen because God is pleading with those hearts of even those people that they get one more chance. But there'll be people, and I said this last year, I'll say it again, there'll be people 1 year from now that will not be on this planet. They will be dead. And whether their decision tonight is to accept Jesus or not, they'd better come to that conclusion, because there are plots, plans, schemes, blueprints, and operations in place to see that they don't listen another day or live another day. V, will you share, please?
And Steve, if I could jump in real quick.
Sure.
When we were at the conference in Montana, when Coach Dave was speaking, he made a great point about the Christian mindset and how when you're a Christian, you should not be afraid of certain things. You should not be afraid to die, for instance, was the example he made, because our eternal salvation or our eternal destiny is already fulfilled. In the same way, are people going to call it fear and doom porn when it actually does happen, when the stock market collapses, when the dollar is devalued to a point where you can't use it to buy anything? It's not going to be, just a warning then. It's going to be real. So, Christians should not be scared either. They should not be fearful. We should always be aware of what's happening in the earth. We should be aware of Satan's devices. And be mindful of them.
And knowledge replaces fear, and the knowledge you're getting, folks, tonight is like the equivalent of a professor's class. I mean, folks, listen to V, listen to Steve. These guys have been in the trenches, and let me tell you, as a Christian, anybody I'd want to be in the trenches with are these two gentlemen. Absolutely. So we apologize for jumping in here. V, go ahead and continue as Steve directed. V, I think you're muted still.
He dropped off. It's gone back on. There we go.
Okay.
Not a problem. But as he was saying, you're always going to have idiots. You're always going to have detractors. You know what? It's just the nature of the way people are, right? The vast majority of people don't get it. These are people that don't look at data. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Okay, I'm a data guy. I'm an analyst. I look at millions and millions of bits of data and information on a daily basis. Okay, my head is buried in multiple computer screens in my office, looking at markets in the United States, all across Asia, all across Europe, all across South America, all across Africa. When I look at data from every continent in the world, and all this data is pointing one thing. Now, you all can debate all you want about this thing and that thing, and is this going to happen? Will a comet fall out of the sky and hit Barack Obama on the head? Is Vladimir Putin a space alien? You could have, people could debate that junk all day long. But one thing about what I do, one thing that I love about the kind of work that I do in my field in particular, is that the numbers don't lie. And I'm talking about the real numbers. So you can sit there and name, call, and all this other stuff. I find it laughable. I find it actually kind of sad, because it's one thing for you to make a mockery of this, call it fear porn. Really? Was it fear porn in 1933 when when we hit the Depression and 7.5 million people starved to death? Is it fear porn knowing that 52 million of your countrymen are on food stamps? Is it fear porn when 92 million of your countrymen can't find a job and they're permanently falling out of the workforce? Is it fear porn that 10.6 million of your countrymen are receiving unemployment benefits? Is it fear porn that over 15 to 20 million young children go to sleep in this country? Is that fear porn? Is it fear porn that your country's currency is being rejected globally, all around the world, that trade zones are being set up to trade and to have commerce, bisecting the dollar without even using the dollar? Is it fear porn to know that your country, you can't even your country from where it was 13 years ago? No, this has nothing to do with fear. This is data. This is information. This is truth. What you need to do is take the truth, take the data, take the information, put your brain to work. Shut off the Dancing with the Stars. Turn off your Game of Thrones, HBO. All right, I mean, some of you might be into that, but hey, the books are better. Turn off this junk and start looking at the hard numbers. Spend about 5 minutes. Figure out how money works for a second. Start looking at the plumbing of this whole entire thing. And I promise you, you won't look at things the same ever again. And that being said, one of the things that Steve talked about that I want to segue into is he talked about a two-currency system. And I want to, people say, well, what the heck does that look like? I don't get it. I don't understand that concept. Two-currency system, you talked about it before. Where do I find examples of this? Well, folks, there's plenty of examples. Okay, China used to have a two-currency system. Okay, before they became fully, before they fully had the yuan, the renminbi. Okay, they've had a two-currency system prior to that. Cuba, to this day, has a two-currency system. They have a peso that's used within the island itself, where government employees and citizens of Cuba are paid, and they have an international peso, which they use to buy goods and trade. It's the same thing for the United States. There's going to be a crap, junk, continental currency, a republic dollar. That's the word that's being kicked around. And that currency is going to be absolutely devalued from what you're used to, what the dollar is today. People say, well, how much devaluation? Well, we're talking about devaluation, folks, of 70 to 80%. In other words, it's going to cost you $10, $11 for a loaf of bread. It's going to cost you $20, $25 a gallon for gas. These are the types of things that we're talking about. And you're going to be getting paid accordingly. You're going to be getting paid in this worthless toilet paper that's good for nothing but plastering your walls. And the secondary system, or currency, is going to be a trade dollar. This dollar is going to be devalued anywhere between 40 to 60%. It's going to be used for the settlement of international trade. Because why is it like this? You might say, well, the world demands. The world is saying, okay, because you like to devalue your currency, because you're on this kick of killing everything, and you want to kill your own currency in the process, well, here you go. Here's a republic dollar. Go ahead and kill it all you want. But in terms of your international dollar, we're not going to take any of your republic dollars. You're going to have to come up with a secondary currency in order to trade with the rest of us. So this is a dictate that the rest of the world is coercing the money powers of the United States to do. They're forcing them. The market is dictating it. Because the market's getting to a point where we're not going to use dollars anymore. And if they're not going to use dollars anymore, then why? Why don't they want to use dollars? Well, number one, it's toxic. Number two, it's completely devaluing at a daily, monthly basis. Number three, it's attached to a nation that's out of control, run by drug-addicted, pedophilic, neo-Satanists, Nazis. Okay? They're crazy lunatics who are obsessed with death. So the world's saying, we don't want to deal with that currency, so you're going to have to give us another currency. You can take your dollar, here it is, and go ahead and devalue it. Go ahead and devalue it as much as you want. And that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to give us a currency for us to transact in, and it's going to be devalued to oblivion. And then the secondary currency, just like how they do it in Cuba and how they did in China and how they did in other parts of the world at sundry times throughout human history, we're going to have a trade currency that's going to be used in international trade. And it's also going to be probably one of the weakest currencies out there. Because the IMF requirements say that a complete global realignment has to occur, and stock has to be of each nation has to be taken, and that stock is going to be upon the debt of the nation and its resource wealth. Well, we have more debt than anybody else. Number one. Number two, we really don't have any assets. We don't have any hard commodities. We offer nothing in terms of industry. So we're on the bottom of the barrel. Now you might say to yourself, well, why would the IMF, which is a quote-unquote at one point a United States fund organization, why did they come up with such terms? Well, it's simple. The IMF is actually controlled by China now. For the last 2 years, the U.S. has done nothing to fund the IMF. And that's why Christine Lagarde, the head person of the IMF, said, hey, you know what? We're actually thinking of moving our headquarters to Beijing. So the Chinese are going to be controlling what then, folks? Your international trade currency. Well, why would they control your international trade currency? Because they also control most of your manufacturing. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, simple. Most idle manufacturing is being purchased throughout the United States in places like Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Michigan and Wyoming and Wisconsin and Camden, New Jersey and Newark, all these places in New York and in Iowa, all in Idaho, California. All these factories that they're buying up and retooling, that's for you. Because you, when this whole reset gets done with, you're going to be one of the cheapest, low-cost workforces on the planet. You're going to be right there next to the guy in Vietnam making Nike shoes for Chinese kids to wear. Your kids will be working in Foxconn making the new iPhone 7, which will be the same thing as the iPhone 1. So that's what's happening here, folks. Okay? So in other words, your international trade will be something that's going to be controlled by a foreign entity. And that entity might not have direct control and direct representation in your currency. No, they will use a puppet bureaucracy, just like you have a puppet bureaucracy in the EU that dictate the economics of the EU. It's going to be the same thing. That's what's headed for the United States. That's how they plan to restore order once this whole chaos ensues. So what do? You have to take steps to get out of the way. Hope I answered a little bit of that two-currency conundrum that people were having issues with or having trouble understanding how it works. But that's how it works, folks. Steve.
Well, I think that the biggest issue is that the hardest thing for anybody, and it's almost like I will just call it the cymbal clanging response, is when you haven't used your senses, And seriously, this isn't a put down, it's just a statement. There's a reason why there are so many noises in the world. There's a reason why there's so much background noise in the world. There's a reason why you've got music playing in elevators, and everybody knows how bad that is. There's a reason why there's supermarket music. There's a reason why you're put on hold and there's music, if you can call it that. There's a reason why the background noise is being amped up and the volume up. There's a reason why television sets are no longer 21 inches in diagonal, but are up to, 90 inches or bigger. There's a reason why telescreen is now present. There's a reason why telescreen and television programming were even called that. The idea is simply this, ladies and gentlemen. Everything is designed to drown out the voice of God and the voice of conscience. Now, when we come to talking about the two-tier currency, we come to talking about the death of the dollar. There's going to be, I coined some terms a couple of years ago, double cross, triple cross, and quadruple cross. Those, by the way, aren't horse races, okay? Those are that everybody's alliances and allegiances are going to be changing on a moment-to-moment basis. We're seeing the first, listen, if I were Poland, I would basically say the same thing that the Polish guy, forget if it was a prime minister or whoever, but one of the top-ranking Polish officials just said the United States is good for nothing. The Japanese have already come to that conclusion. The Filipinos know that. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, the band plays on, the golf course and the putting green is occupied full time, and I want to remind everybody something. The book of Isaiah is very specific concerning these times we now live in. And the thing that I love working and doing these shows with V on is because, look, he's an analyst. He deals with the data. I try and bring in the relevancy of the scripture for the time we live in, telling everybody that you must take it to the Lord in prayer. I've never said anything otherwise. I will never say anything otherwise. There are people who say, believe me, I am the prophet. Well, no, the Bible speaks of prophets, and it speaks of plural. Or I am the apostle. You build any churches? Well, no, but I got it on my card. I think that's the other thing. God bless you, Romy. You and I have seen every form of what I would call religious distortion and some of the biggest ministries in the world. So where is all this leading to? Right now, that's why Jesus is I think the parables are more pertinent and important than any of us have ever even understood in Sunday school. Because it's one thing to have ears and hear not. It's one thing to have eyes and see not. It's one thing to have a heart of understanding versus a heart of darkness. And quite candidly, we're now in the position in this land where gross darkness, and as Pastor Langford said, Doug, I think a year or two ago on an interview, there's not only a famine for food coming, there's a famine for the Word of God. That's why when Pastor David Langford speaks the sermons he does, that people respond because they're so hungry for the Word of God, they don't want the pablum. And I want to say one thing more. When the Pope brings in the charismatics and tries to bring in, let's say, the who's who in the evangelical world to combine with Rome, if anybody says they don't believe in a one-world religion, it's happening right before your very eyes. So as we enter into this time, it's no longer 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I remember when 40 years ago when Willard Cantillon first wrote the book, The Day the Dollar Dies. Did you ever read that, V? I don't know.
No, I haven't read that book.
V's still on.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, but I'm just saying, 40 years ago, Mary Stuart Ralphie, 40 years ago, When Your Money Fails. I mean, there were some visionaries that looked forward, wrote about, and look, I believed it was in the 70s. I believed it in the 80s. I believed it in the 90s. But things had to happen. I think the problem with living in the future, guys, is that you expect immediate fulfillment. And if you say something on Friday and it's not fulfilled on Saturday, everybody writes you off. But look, it took 70 years for the words of Jesus to be fulfilled when he said there wouldn't be one stone left unturned when everybody was overwhelmed by the temple. And I got to tell you something. The Word of God is the greatest dandruff remover to flakes, okay? You can have flaky arguments, you can have flaky theology, you can have flaky this, flaky that. But when you finally get it, that the Word of God is what we all have to live on, and this is why I'm talking about this tonight in the contents of what we're talking about. Where a man's treasure is, there will his heart be also. That's what the Scripture says. So what we're trying to do is help you to be faithful stewards and to understand what's going on, so when people flip out around you and you have the peace of God because you were told, and you were told you don't have to run to the grocery store, whether it's an EMP, it doesn't matter, or an asteroid strike, or whatever the strike is, or whatever the event is, you're pre-positioned ahead of time. So data, let's just talk about data, and that's what V is doing. He's giving you the data sets, he's giving you the data points, he's telling you that numbers don't lie. We all know that John Williams of Shadow Stats is the guy that basically has been telling you how bad it really is. And can I ask this, since when does the whole world that lie in the evil one, as Jesus said, since when does that even begin? When would they tell the truth? They don't. There is no truth in them. And yet, day after day, Doug, there are people listening to this broadcast, they will go to the mainstream news media. I have basically a son, and my son, not Tyler, the one that people met but another son, and he believes only what he sees on Fox, The point being is that that's all he has time for. And that's the problem. We're all caught up in time, and he's got a wife and kids, and, he's a dad, and he's, big-time construction guy, but that's all he has time for. So the point is that we're now in a position for the events that have been in the future to be unraveling right before your very eyes, or unfolding right before your very eyes. And again, when it comes to what we're talking about, and now I need to ask you a question because this was asked of me. The 105 nations that are BRIC affiliates that have had it up to their eyeballs, and if anybody understood the diplomacy going on behind the scenes of the Russian ambassador and the Chinese ambassadors and the Chinese the Americans can't even keep up with the purse any longer of the Chinese, because not only can the Chinese say in Africa, we will back your railroad, Tanzania, we will back your mining, this country, that country, and not only that, but we'll build all the infrastructure and we'll give you money and we'll give it to you as grants, and when the American dollar crashes, guess what? Our money will still buy any goods, any place in the world. And when it all comes down, it's energy related. So if you think that $4 a gallon gas is tough, 10 will bring the country to a standstill. Every day I get emails from truckers. I have a whole lot of truckers. God bless all you open road truckers and your wives. May the Lord have you at the right place at the right time. But they see what's going on. They know what's going on. And their lives are becoming more and more difficult for them. And when the trucks don't move, nothing moves onto the shelves, and that means there will be nothing on the shelves to move off of the shelves. So the two-tier currency, here's the point. In everything, some of you are just waiting for one more thing to happen and one more thing to happen, or this to come to pass or that to come to pass before you move. At that point, it's too tough. When it comes to even I'll just make this statement, when it comes to precious metals, all precious metals are delivered one of four ways. To the big guys by armored car or armored transport airplanes via Viamat, Brinks, or whoever. In the real world of the little guy, it either comes by the U.S. Postal Service, by FedEx, or it comes by UPS ground. So the point is what happens to the ability to get those? And again, I've calculated, and I talked to enough people that when the panic comes, I used to think the metals dug in the dealer's shelves would last like a week. I don't even think it'll last 3 hours, because there's that much buying power, and when that kind of money comes into a panic market, the prices go up. The point in having anything to barter is to be able to have an appreciating asset that has a global price reference and global point versus what is it, the old currency or the new currency? And somebody says, well, what happens if they make gold illegal? Well, let me share this. They've already made veterans illegal. They've already made every form of patriot, constitutionalist, homeschooler, Tea Party, anybody who's somebody other than a globalist or a new world order. They've already said 40 years ago that anybody that, and it was a statement by one of the United Nations religious people, and I forget his name right now, but he said one way or another, everybody's going into the New World Order either by consent or by conquest. And I know there's another statement, too, that by either consent or conquest there will be a New World Order. That means they'll either kill you or you'll go along with it. And right now, obviously, it's kind of like killing and grilling. I mean, we have people being murdered and slaughtered with not even a whimper. But you know what, V? I guarantee you, when the money stops and the banks go down and the ATMs don't work and the credit cards don't work, and every day I get emails from people saying they can't get their money out of the bank. By the way, today it was Scotiabank. The point being is that then the howl will go up, but who are they going to turn to? Their comic book heroes? Do you think Batman will be there? Will Spider-Man be there? Oh, Spider-Man's already been there. He just happened to be the one that raided your account in his web. The point is that people will look to everything and anyone to deliver them to bring back order into their life, and at that point they sign on the dotted line for an eternity of hell. So, V, now, will you please address what the latest information on the City of London is?
Sure, absolutely. You know, one of the things that, oftentimes me and W, we like to talk and kick around ideas and strategies and scenarios, and it's pretty awesome to get a lot of information out of him. We get a kick out of it. It's a lot of fun for us guys. So one of the things that we talked about is, we know what's happening. We know about the complete realignment towards the east, that there is a great deal of mistrust amongst the West, especially the American banking structure in particular. What's happening right now, folks, is that the City of London is trying to cut the noose. It's trying to cut away from any sort of attachment to Wall Street, okay? Wall Street was built up by the city simply as the straw man, okay? It was built up so this way that all the fraud that's in the market, all the criminal behavior in the market, Wall Street will take the blame for it, okay? Because they are in the process right now to reinvent the image of the City of London. And this is why the City of London wants to go ahead and become close buddies with the Russians and the Chinese in being involved in trade settlements and trade negotiations. They see the handwriting on the road, so they're ready to pull the plug on the carcass that's called the U.S. economy, and strip off the lifeline over here. So that being said, just to give you guys that little background, right? How do they, knowing that the silver price fix has been announced, that they're going to close it in August the 14th, how are they going to replace the price fix? In China, to settle those contracts in silver. That's one aspect of it. But there's a great deal of paper that's being floated around today. And one of the emails I received, and I also got one of my contacts in London confirmed it to me as well, London and the LMBA and the LME, the London Metal Exchange, they're working together. And W, and I of course this is up to W, I say, hey man, what do you think is going to happen? How are they going to get around this whole entire trust issue that the City of London has right now with the rest of the world? The rest of the world, they don't, they hate America. They don't like the City of London too much. They know there's some con artistry going on in the City of London, but they absolutely abhor Wall Street. Wall Street is the redheaded stepchild that nobody wants. They hate Wall Street. They hate the U.S. in that regard. But the City of London, they don't like it. So how do they win back that trust? And W said something, and he said, hey, you know what, that's what they're going to do. They're going to come out with some sort of an electronic silver price fix. Then they're going to market it as something as being totally flawless, totally fair, and unmanipulatable. Okay, they're going to market it in such a way as it being free from any sort of manipulation by anybody. It's going to be a program that they're just going to set up there, and it's just going to run. And that's going to go ahead and create the silver price fix and what's fair in the market in terms of real supply and demand for silver. And I said, okay, that's going to be interesting. Let's see how they do it. Well, today, the City of London actually announced, and the London Metals Exchange and the LMBA, they announced that they are going to create an OTC electronic exchange for silver. And they're saying, well, London has always been the center of the silver price fix, and we want to continue to play that role for everybody. And we're going to go ahead and make it fairer, make the system more transparent, that people could go ahead and have confidence in trusting the numbers that were generated. Okay, so they said, and one of the is they're marketing this electronic price fix as something that's robust, and they're especially highlighting one thing more than anything else: transparency. Everybody will be having access to the inner workings of this and see the inner workings of it and know that it is a transparent system. There's no fraud here. And you know what? I found that to be fascinating. And the reason why I found that to be fascinating is as soon as I got news, I called W and I said, listen, man, what you said is came true. Kudos to you. Do you know what this means? And we both came to the agreement, yes, they're positioning themselves to get to the exit doors. And what does that mean? Well, about a week ago when me and W came on Doug and Joe's show, and we said, W's received a code, and I received the word that of an event that's going to occur in mid-July. Well, this whole entire announcement, this proposal by the LMBA, and the City of London, is basically stating to the rest of the financial markets, okay, you've already got your signal to get into silver, okay, because silver is going to be the kill shot that we're going to bring the dollar down with, okay? You've gotten your signal to get in place. We're not saying it's the end of the world, the market's going to tumble on July the 15th, and it's the end-all, be-all. No, what we're saying is this is the beginning of the push off the cliff. And we're going to hit a lot of things on the way down, okay? It's not going to be a free-for-all here. So the City of London is saying, get ready. Now, with the announcements of this electronic price fix, what they're saying is basically we're getting our mechanisms together, we're having our tools implemented where we will control the exit doors of the flight away from the dollar. In other words, every person that's in every exchange and in every fund that is leaving and fleeing out of the dollar and out of dollar-denominated securities will be fleeing past exit doors that the City of London will control, where they will make a considerable amount of money from the dollar flight, number one. And number two, now you're going to say, well, City of London, they don't have much silver. You're right, they don't, okay? But they're going to set themselves up in such a way that they're going to make a considerable amount of money on the churning of silver as it's being traded on the market with this new electronic, transparent OTC system that they're rolling out with. That's profound, folks. Okay, so what the heck does it all mean? Well, it means this. Number one, the on your marks, get set signal has been given. Number two, the infrastructure for the exit doors, for the collapse, for this whole thing, basically the control valves of this whole entire collapse that's going to occur, that's already being set up. The signal is giving that they're going to build that. So there's only one more final phase left. Okay, and what's the final stage? Well, the final stage, folks, is pulling the rug from underneath this whole system. Is pulling the pin and watching this grenade called the U.S. dollar go off. That's the final step. So step one's been given, which is the code that W talked about, and my guys at the City of London talked about in terms of, getting ready. This is step number two, saying we're going to set up the mechanism we're going to set up, in other words, this escape route out of $1, we're the ones who are going to pave that road. Do you see that? Do you see how clear that is now? Right? They're the ones who are saying, we're going to set that up for you. Now get ready. It's going to begin. This is huge, huge news. And just in case if that wasn't enough, the LMBA, alongside with the LME and the City of London, they're looking at 7 different options right now. They already have it picked out. It's going to be this electronic OTC. But they're telling you, we're deliberating on 7 different options on getting this whole silver price fix. So this is exactly what W and I were talking about. This is stuff that, this stuff is ready to blow. So if you're not in position, positioning is what's going to save you. Positioning is what's going to feed your family. Positioning is what's going to ensure that you survive the 60 to 90 days of abject, incredible hell, number one. And positioning is what's going to ensure that you survive the next coming months and the years of an absolutely broken economy where you won't have supplies, where you won't have goods and services. It's position. So you have to position yourself. Now, you still have time. I'm not saying this thing's going to come apart next month and we're going to be in the middle of hyperinflationary hell. That's not what I'm talking about. You have time to prepare, and this is why it's important that you do those things, that you make the right contacts in order for you to prepare. That's as simple as it gets, folks. It's not rocket science here. All right? It's not rocket science. Steve.
I think that critical, I'm getting emails, while I'm listening to you, and people are saying, well, how long am I going to have to bear this storm? I'm telling you, the storm is coming. I want to share this with you guys because it just came in from a friend of mine. We call him Weather Watcher, and Hawk always quotes him, and he's got a heart for Jesus. And I want to read this on the air. This just came in, to point this through. He said, Steve, not seen in many years, and huge, gigantic in size, 40 miles high and over 43 miles wide sprites, which are electrical discharges above thunderstorms. They're very high into the stratosphere. These have been photographed from far away, over 250 miles, and look like red flaming swords over the mid-USA. The Lord is warning, but so few care. He always warns before a chastisement, and this could be such an event. And he says, woe unto America, for you blaspheme and mock Almighty God, and signs that Jesus is Lord. Now, this guy happens to be one of the most brilliant men, handpicked by, Dr. Teller. If any of you understand who Dr. Teller was, the original head of MJ-12, Majestic 12, for those of you who are, UFO people, you know what that means. If those of you don't know what Majestic 12 is, look it up. So we're talking someone who's been gifted with supernatural brilliance, but with that, an amazing love for the Lord Jesus Christ. So how does this relate? Is the tension that's building in the financial markets, it's like a capacitor. And I think that's what you're saying, to the people. Here is the capacitor. It's being charged 7 different ways to come at this thing, but at some point, the very capacitor discharges. So who would make more money, ladies and gentlemen? The people going for nickels and dimes now when they're trying to keep silver in the $21, $22, $23 range, or the guys that are going to charge a commission when it goes to $300 an ounce or higher, and then they're paying that, they're willing to pay that, to end up with, guess what? Everybody's silver. Is that pretty much it, V?
Absolutely.
So when and I didn't hear, forgive me, I did hear the broadcast with you and W, and I just got to get my thoughts, and I thought it was one of the most succinct. I said to you, if you remember, V, I said you nailed it, and W hit it out of the ballpark. Those were my exact comments. And ladies and gentlemen, tonight, okay, let's just say this. The ball has just been hit out of the galaxy and is headed for Alpha Centauri. The point is that there are things you can do now. Let me tell you, and everybody says, what's the first thing I should do? If you're a new prepper, I still would tell you this, and I don't have anything to do with this book. Holly Dale wrote a book called Dare to Prepare. For those of you that are now just getting it, get a hold of that book. It's one of the best prep books you can get. You got to begin someplace. For those of you that are sitting with your funds and finances in paper, I don't know how to say this, but you can add a Phillips head, you can add a Torx, you can add a slotted screw head, but anyway you turn it, the paper is going to be turned on you. One of the great disconnects is trying to get to people to understand, Doug and Joe, that commercial paper is dependent upon an underlying performing asset of some kind. If you own a huge building, then you got to have rent to pay the building, pay the taxes. If that rent is decreasing, and I think, what is it, 60,000 manufacturing plants have left the United States over the past decade? 60,000. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you didn't listen. I'm saying America, let's just use that word. America didn't listen when those of us on talk radio were screaming about NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. Nobody listened enough to even put enough pressure on those lackeys they vote in called representatives or senators to get them to stand against it. If the Lord God of heaven were to reveal the amount of bribes that have gone on, and it looked like basically computer tape printing out a Google of numbers, because the point being is that's how much the bribes have flowed, and so much money has flowed, that basically when the Bible has a lot to say about leaders that take bribes. The point is they can't be trusted. So now you have the end in sight. You have the end near, and I'm talking about of the financial market first and foremost, but the last place you want to be, anybody, is you don't want to be in a grocery line waiting to get your allotment of groceries when all hell breaks loose, nor do you want to have all your eggs in one basket, literally meaning, if you've got precious metals, disperse them, hide them. Same thing with food, because at some point you always have to remember you may not be able to get back to where the majority of your holdings are, and you may have to have a point in between. Because listen, the eagle vision that I put up on my website, or dream, or actually it wasn't a dream, it was a literal situation, and the sister that sent it to me had the complete understanding. A third of the eagles died, a third are going into captivity, and a third were allowed to live in the land. That's what Pastor Langford said, Doug, on your show 2 years ago, that we were in bondage, now we're going into captivity. You remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so people are in financial bondage because I know you saw this, V. What is it, 40%? And I forget the percentage, so I can stand to be corrected. Or maybe 56% of people have zero savings for a rainy day. Is that the number, Doug, V?
Yeah, it's actually really higher than that. It's
okay,
much higher.
So much higher, and the point being is that the generation of building, the biggest building booms in the country now are building apartments that are subsidized for people that used to be able to buy homes, but now the majority of their income is going to pay rent where it used to pay a mortgage. Listen, these guys are like bloodsuckers on steroids. They're not happy any longer with just sucking your blood, man. They're bone-crunching, marrow-eating, osmotic creatures from hell trying to suck all the life and every hope for any type of a better future from there. So they're osmotic, blood-sucking scum. How's that, V? I don't know anything more how should I say, detailed in my description.
No, it's pretty detailed.
hey, V, let me ask you a question. See if I can jump in here for a second.
Sure.
V, you were talking about the closing of the silver price fix, and then of course the emergence of this electronic price fix for silver, for example. This supposedly something that cannot be manipulated. My question is, obviously anything can be manipulated, and certainly this is no exception. But what will this do, for example, in the short term with the value of silver against the U.S. dollar?
I mean, short term and long term, the silver value is going to explode relative to the dollar. It's going to absolutely just go skyrocketing. The whole thing is this: the City of London, the LMBA, the LME, those who control it, they know that they cannot continue to manipulate the numbers. So what they're going to do is they're going to hoist all the blame, on the U.S. banks, and a German bank is involved, which is Deutsche Bank, and PNB Paribas is also involved. So that's why you've seen the recent Justice Department, Eric Holder, the numbnut, hit PNB with a $10 billion fine. They know that there's going to be the four guys, straw men in this whole thing. The straw men that they've built up in this whole entire silver scandal is, of course, Wall Street, predominantly J.P. Morgan, a few U.S. firms like Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, and then you have also a couple of the Eurozone banks like Deutsche Bank are known to be, and Societe Generale, which actually gets a free pass for some strange reason. But, these are known criminals. So the City of London is going to make sure, hey, yeah, we have problems. Hey, what market, what exchange doesn't have a problem? At least, we're not as bad as the Americans. And look how bad the Americans are. Like I told you, look, it's Wall Street that's being vetted. Okay, the City of London, they get to skate free. Okay, they're going to skate free of this. And they're doing things to make themselves as attractive as possible. So they're no longer going to play this massive suppression game on silver. They're going to let silver go to $200, $300, $400, $500, $600, $800 an ounce, as dictated by the market. I mean, they'll say, hey, here's this transparent system. And they're going to let that run for a little while, just like they're going to let a gold-backed, world, trade settlement run for a while. So the world is going to transition to hard commodities. Why? Because we're stuck in the paper fraud. And as the world goes back to hard assets, they're going to, at the right time, weasel their way back into the system and start the manipulation process all over again, start the fraud, start the pumping, the creation of the bubbles, and they're going to start eventually the wealth extraction process, which runs anywhere between 100 to 60 some odd years on each country they do it to. So it's our turn. Our turn is over. Now they're going to move to the Russians and the Chinese. They're going to extract their wealth, and these guys are parasites. This is how they operate. Okay, so that's so in terms of silver price and its bearing, if you don't need to fear that City of London is setting up this electronic silver exchange that's going to keep the it's going to keep the price of silver at $19 to $20. No. They're going to let the silver price go up. They know that the market, because they want to have, you got to understand, you have to get this. They want to show the world that they still have a semblance, a visage of honesty and integrity, and the problem was always and has been Wall Street. Wall Street's the problem. So they're going to come out of this unscathed. The City of London is positioning themselves. They are going to position themselves as the saviors of this whole thing. Okay, so they're going to let you see? So they're not going to manipulate the silver numbers down. They're going to let it go up.
In the IMF's June World Economic Outlook document, it talks about what their goals are and how they're, through monetary policy, they are going to complete the banking union. And what they're talking about here is the continuation of the U.S. dollar declining in value versus the rise of the Chinese market, and how that they're going to use this to consolidate the central banking system, just as you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why, I said a long time ago that London will be involved in a currency swap with the Chinese. And sure enough, March 31st, the Bank of England inked the deal with the Chinese central bank because they're going to do a straight-up yuan swap facility right there in the city of London. So that's already been set up. So London knows about this whole entire importance of the renminbi being the second most used currency in world trade. Okay, they know that. That's why they're opening up tax havens for Chinese billionaires to park over $4 trillion in the Caribbean in British tax-free havens. I mean, come on. They're doing the same thing with the Russians, okay, in places like Gibraltar, in the British Virgin Islands, and all these other places. It's the same thing, okay? So, yeah, they are positioning themselves. And another kicker in this whole entire thing is this. The best example I can give you is this. They don't care if Russia has 100 million tons of gold and the Chinese have 2 billion tons of gold and the Indians have 10 billion tons of gold. They don't care, okay? You don't get how these guys make their money. They don't make their money on this stuff. They make money on the trade of this stuff, okay? So what does that mean? Well, picture it this way. You know, the story goes, if anybody seen the Steve Jobs movie, I'm not talking about the one done by that idiot from the 70s show, Ashton Kutcher. I'm talking about the one this was done by Ryan Gosling. And this is the whole scene. This is right outside of Manhattan, right outside of Canal Street, where Bill Gates confronts Steve Jobs. And Jobs is accusing Gates of stealing the Xerox operating system, which, you know, later became Windows, and Gates is accusing Jobs of doing the same thing, which later became OS, you know, the Apple operating system. So Steve starts yelling at Bill and says, "You know what? How could you do this? You're stealing the stuff." And Steve's like, "Hey, I stole this from the front, you know, from out the front door. You stole this out of the back door." And Steve Jobs is like, "Well, your computers suck. No one's going to buy them. They're flat." And then Bill Gates is like, "Well, I don't care. Who cares? I don't care about my computers. You make washing machines. I make the soap." And that's what I want you guys to get. The city of London, they don't care about how much gold the Chinese and the Russians have, and they want to do a gold back sell. They don't care about that. They sell the soap. You see, the gold is the washing machine. It's the hard asset. The soap is the mechanism, is the agitation, is the agent that makes it work. So even though they have all the hard assets, but the mechanisms of trade is still the city of London. The mechanisms of certification is still, guess what? Most of the gold in the world, over 70-some-odd% of the gold is refined where? In Switzerland. Who did the Swiss use to certify their gold? Oh, the LMBA. You think that's going to change? No. Why? Because the LMBA has over 100 years of integrity in certifying gold and silver. That's not going to change. You see? Who's writing all the loan agreements? Who wrote the loan agreement that the Russians gave to the Ukrainians? The first loan agreement. It was the City of London. It was written in City of London terms. Do you get it? So it doesn't matter how much gold the Russians and Chinese and Indians and the rest of the world had. It doesn't matter. Because they control the trade mechanism which the hard assets are going to be traded. So they could have all the washing machines in the world. They control the soap. Do you get it?
That's a fantastic analogy. And folks, I would urge everyone to go back and listen to what V said via the archive. Go back and listen to it 2, 3, 4 times, however many times you need to understand the analogy between the washing machine and the soap, and the perfect analogy. You know, it's almost as if the light bulb went off over my head listening to you describe this. So really, the bottom line is, it just doesn't matter. I mean, you've got these satanic Luciferians in charge of the global economic system.
Yeah, they set the policy,
Yeah.
which in turn affects the markets. Each market individually, they have a policy and plan laid out for each sector of the world, which they play with different numbers or ways they do things, and we will see major shifts which are now being shielded by quantitative easing and other methods of foolery, whatever, the manipulation that they're doing.
Correct.
Wow. Okay. And I find it ironic, too, as I look at, and Steve, you mentioned this, about looking at the back of the dollar bill or looking at the, V2 as well. I mean, order out of chaos. They're destroying the globalists. They're destroying our country. They're destroying the world, the wealth of the West. They're pillaging us, and it's blatant right on our money, this message of order out of chaos. Now it's obvious, should be obvious to everyone what that means, although, Steve, you've been saying it for years, and VU as well.
Hey, Doug, do we need to take a break because we're over the hour?
Wow.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I noticed the red light here. Folks, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our third and final hour of the Hagman and Hagman Report on this Wednesday, June 25th, 2014. We are joined by Steve Quayle and the Guerrilla Economist V, and we are talking about the economy and the future of this country, its monetary direction, and what things indicators are showing the way things are going to go and how fast they're going to go there. One more thing, V, before I turn it back over to you. In this World Economic Outlook from the IMF, it talks about the forecasting of commodities. And it says in this document, it talks about how they use policy to forecast and predict futures. And it says that during the metals boom that we saw a few years back, that it was the forecast error was more than 100%, it says, when forecasting for the value of metals in times of a recession. It goes on to say that the performance suggests that future prices may not fare well as predictors during turbulent times or periods of structural change belief. Do you think this is something they're just putting in here to shy away from, because in previous paragraphs they talk about the importance of the commodities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to understand, you cannot trust a single shred of information or reports or anything that's coming out of the IMF. And the reason for that is simply this. The IMF is pretty much an agency that's at a crossroads. There are two factions in the IMF. One are the holdouts from the G7 countries, which are the list of basically the most broke and solvent group of losers on the planet. And the other faction of the IMF are those who want to take the IMF and have it integrated into the BRICS Bank, have it completely dissolved, pretty much, and non-existent, so to speak. So the ones who actually put out that report, half that report saying, hey, having commodities is a wonderful thing, but in the future it might not be so as a place to, the prices might not rise in commodities in times of turmoil and trouble. That just doesn't make sense. That's double speak. That is something, again, written by bureaucrats who've never worked a day in their life. These are not real economists. These are academians who sit behind a desk all day, and they've never been out there. They never held a real job, so they have no clue. These are the ones who put that report together, are a bunch of Keynesian losers who've come from the Keynesian School of Economics, in which nothing makes really any sort of whatsoever. So I will absolutely take that shred and put it into the shredder, alongside with all the other things that the IMF and the World Bank has put out that is just unbelievable nonsense and stupidity at a grand scale.
Amen. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I want to quote Hermann Goering, head of the Nazi Luftwaffe, because over this last week I've been getting all kinds of, and I'm reading this for the benefit of those who will be asked to do horrible things to the American people, having sworn allegiance to something other than the Constitution, who fly in America's lead. Not all pilots will do this, but listen to this. Quote, Hermann Goering at the Nuremberg trials. Of course the people don't want war, but after all, it's the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it's always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it's a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to greater danger. What we've seen is a reverse hypothecation of Goering's words. You remember when the Democrats were claiming that Bush was a warmonger? And by the way, I hold Bush and Cheney and the whole crew responsible for the Iraq fiasco. Everybody tried to tell him not to do it. I remember being on talk radio and saying, look, you guys, you can't achieve it. And the same thing with Afghanistan. Now it's a colossal, fouled up beyond all repair, a FUBAR situation. Look at where we're at right now, ladies and gentlemen. The massive amounts of confrontations between the Chinese and the Japanese, flying, fighters and bombers and electronic warfare planes within literally 10 to 50 yards from each other. Nuclear bombers off the coast of California. I did get a call from a general who told me point blank, he said the current protocol is we cannot do anything to intercept until they're within a 12-mile limit. Well, I'll give you two words that kind of throw that out the door: hypersonic missile. And hypersonic is basically hyphenated. Ladies and gentlemen, again, the hardest thing for people to wrap their brains around, the hardest thing to emotionally come to grips with, the hardest thing to even imagine is the fact that when a nation goes down in its perversity, when a nation is smothered in blood, whether it's newborns or hellfire missile strikes on innocent men, women, and children, collateral damage, that term will come back to haunt everyone who used it in eternity, because there is a time where every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Okay, getting to the financial. Look, the Bible is so practical, especially when it talks about the parable of the 10 talents. I have literally dug, and I've used this analogy because I've got to share it one more time. There are people more proud of losing $400,000 or $500,000 on stocks gone bad or the last market crash than will even admit that they should have maybe bought 1,000 ounces. Somebody sent you an email saying, should I still keep my silver? That question is either a bogus question, or the person that bought the silver in 2008 is totally out of touch with reality. If he is telling you what he just told you, and by the way, you guys, this is a real email, Doug, you can verify that, you sent it to me, that what's going to happen, of course you keep your silver. This is again, every financial instrument out there has a call on it by underlying debtors or underlying lenders. In other words, remember, we saw this on a national level when people couldn't even decide who owned their mortgage, and if they paid Company A off, it didn't matter because Company B came and said Company A pocketed the money, and now we're not paid off. So the point being in all this is that we're being dragged into a global war, and it's global jihad. But there's something more important at play, and this is what people don't get. Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who writes its laws. Who said that? Well, everybody knows Rothschild said that, okay? Amschel Rothschild made that statement. Ever since the de Medicis loaned out gold, or actually stored gold, and then wrote script for a person that was traveling so they didn't have to carry all their gold with them, and that the person who was given the script in payment could come and get that, well, they knew that there was only a certain percentage of the people that would take their gold. The Swiss have lived on that principle for 500 years. So the point being right now, and where this is at, if you can't touch it, you don't own it, okay? Obviously, people still have, and this is the psychology of denial, people still have that hope in the Lone Ranger is going to show up or something equivalent to bail their, denying reality bottoms out of the fire. It isn't going to happen. And therein lies. So people say, well, what can I do anyway? They're so powerful. Yeah, but they're not bigger than God. And they're not. See, that's the key. The key in this whole talk tonight is that God does give wisdom. He gives financial wisdom. To put it into perspective one more time, when Jesus had to flee into Egypt with Mary, his mother, and Joseph, Mary's husband, okay, they had to go down there and hang out for a couple of years. Now, God could have smote Herod at any point, but there was a time for Herod to die. That was an appointed time for Herod to die. In the meantime, the Magi, call them whatever you want to call them, but they brought him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They did not bring him T-bonds, T-bills, or T-notes, okay? They did not bring him Pharaoh's script. They did not bring him Chinese silk paper money. They did not bring him, they brought to him the most precious things in the universe. There's a reason why the Holy of Holies is made out of gold, you guys. Everything in there had to be covered with gold. There's a reason why the outer court, everything is brass. Brass is judgment. There's a reason why silver is refined. There's a reason why silver is still the most important industrial metal in the world. And you can go on my website, go on SQ Metals, and download the infographic on silver. It'll tell you everything you ever wanted to know about silver. It's just sqmetals.com, because the guys at Visual Capitalist put together, and it shows you the history almost in cartoon form. But once you see this, when everybody gets into the arena, that's when prices rise. For instance, here's the way you calculate a minimalist approach to the coming price of gold and silver. Prior to 1979-80, December, January, when gold went to $8.50 an ounce and silver went to $50 an ounce, the infamous Hunt brothers period, it was estimated that 3% of the population or less purchased the precious metals. Right now, it's sub 1%. So you just take it. What's 3 times the valuation? Then you look at yesterday's purchasing power versus today's purchasing power. That's how these guys calculate the basis. But like B said, or here's a good point too, Xerox didn't make the money they made on just selling the machines any more than Hewlett-Packard makes the money on their printers. You go and buy an HP printer, and you can buy the printer for $200. Why is it that the ink is $200? The printer costs more to make than the ink, yet the ink costs more than the printer. Well, guess what that's called? That's called stupid buyer syndrome, and that's how we are played every single day. V and I warned 18 months ago that coming the first of the year that there would be no Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC money, that it was a scam, it was phony, and then guess what? People still put their money. I had a talk with a gentleman in my office the other day, basically had 7 figures in a bank account. I said, that's $1 million for those of you that don't know. And I said, why are you keeping $1 million in the bank account and you're earning 0.5%? Now listen to this. He giggled, he laughed, and then he got nervous in his laugh. I said, do you realize what you're making on that? And to do the math, it was like $5,000, okay? I said to him, fortunately with the timing, I said, do you realize that silver just jumped $1.04 that day? And I said, look, the point being is that $1.04 jump, that was like, I think, 3%, or maybe 3.97%. I said, so there's a big difference there. That's the difference between, obviously, $5,000 and $39,370. And that's the thing, because I get people that whine sometimes, well, I bought it when it was higher and now it's lower. Yeah, but you haven't lost anything. Don't sell it. Hold it. You bought it for the right reasons. The right reasons are there is going to be a U.S. devaluation. There is going to be global abandonment of the U.S. dollar. And look, it used to be said in the United States, I never said it, but it used to be stated, and that was the Nixon lie, that the U.S. dollar was as good as gold. Well, if it was, they would have never had to take us off the gold standard. Nothing's as good as gold. Here's another important point in history. Every paper currency in history has either collapsed or been devalued. When Rhodesia was under the leadership of Ian Smith, the Rhodesian shilling was equal to the dollar. Now it's, what, 1 trillion shillings to buy an egg or something. The hyperinflation is the best real-world picture. Up until Zimbabwe, which is, formerly Rhodesia, there was no contemporary maximum inflation pictogram or country that underwent inflation to the degree that Zimbabwe did outside of the Weimar Republic. That was the old joke. The wheelbarrow cost more than the money it was carting. You see the cartoon. Well, the point is that where is the disconnect? And here's what I want to share to people. You are designed to be an albatross. You are designed to be a dinosaur by the very financial powers against you. They're the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots are simply to either be destroyed or assimilated, as V said, into the Nike, and I'm just picking on Nike or any factory that makes stuff, or how about this, the I factory of the future. You know, the point being, Doug, is that when you see people standing in line or camping out in a store, and I don't know all the different footwear, but Air Jordans or something, there were people sitting outside that store waiting for the store to get its first order, and for a week. For what? Sneakers? And people have been killed for sneakers. You see, this is a psychology of madness, and I say this, madness rules the land. And now to get into the spiritual a little bit, how about three guys playing with a Ouija board and they get demon-possessed? How about all the things that are going bump in the night and starting to materialize? Whether it's the thin man, whether it's the gray man, whether it's the mothman, whether it's this, that, or the other thing. Everything that used to be in comic books or that used to be thought of as horror movies or unreality is coming full-fledged right into our realm of existence. Everything's being tampered with, everything's being distorted, all boundaries are down, and so how do we then live? Well, we live in the context of the end, knowing that greater is He who's in us, the Lord Jesus Christ, than he who's in the world. Now, again, the point being is that I have never met more copping out or irresponsible people than I do in my email when you and I do a broadcast like this, who will send me a statement saying, well, that's for God to judge my effectiveness. No, the Bible says in the book of James, and James says, faith without works is dead. So because men and women will not exercise their faith and stand up, and oh, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot to say in the book of Revelation about the cowards, the fearful, and the unbelieving going in the lake of fire. And Jesus even basically says, look, you think you're rich and have need of nothing, speaking to the Laodiceans, but he said, but you're miserable, wretched, naked, and poor. You see, the bottom line is there's no better picture. So when the things of God are abandoned and the people of God abandon the power of God or the purpose of God and the point of their existence, they will then go to wherever power manifests. And unfortunately, and I've argued with the Lord over this one for 43 years, Lord, why do we have to be sheep led to the slaughter? You know, Lord, I mean, lions aren't like sheep, you know. Tigers aren't sheep, and certainly cheetahs aren't. I mean, Lord, sheep. And I think the answer that he gave me is what I've given before, is because with the power of sin, the ability to see the world as it really is through the eyes of the Spirit are basically non-existent unless God in His mercy to the Christian opens the eyes of your understanding versus the powers of darkness that will do anything and everything. Blood sacrifices, human cannibalism, murder, assassination, sexual perversion, go right down the line. Listen, you need to take Russ Dizdar online course, The Black Awakening. You need to take that because the idea that this is all just a natural form of events or a natural course of history. Look, there's nothing that says that God will not act individually in His people's lives when they appropriate His promise, looking to Him by faith. But the point is, people don't want to look to God because they want to look to the Sunday service. I've had enough people, and I've said this before, you're going to hear the call at some point to come out from amongst them and be separate, lest you be a partaker of their plagues. And this is what's tragic, Doug. People who are listening to this broadcast tonight will have to weigh out. Somebody says, you want everybody out of church? No, I want everybody into the presence of the Lord. I want them out of the establishment and into the reality. I want them out of the religious world, you know. So, look, if I quote the Word of God, I'm not playing God. I'm just telling you what He says. Yet if we have the Pope, who to the Catholics is a vicar of Christ, supposedly infallible, The point being, ladies and gentlemen, I said 20-some years ago, and this really gets some Catholics mad, this is not Catholic bashing, I said the greatest war that will be known in the religious war alongside of the war between Islam and Christendom will be the war within the Catholic Church, between the traditional Catholics and the evolving Catholics, between the true people of God, and there are true Catholics, just like there are really true Pentecostals, true evangelicals. There are people that really love Jesus. But for people who look to their identity apart from Jesus, to people who look to their religious nature as something that will commend them before God, hey, the Bible has an answer to that too. The devil believes in God. The devil's not an atheist. Not only does he believe in God, he has a reference point to know what heaven was like. He has a reference point to know what he was before he became who he is. And he has a reference point. Yet people are choosing the power of the present over the power of redemption. And your money, here's the thing. We're stewards. I can tell you about the parable of the 10 talents. Who hid it? Well, I'm telling you this, 0.5% in the bank is pretty well close to hiding it. And the people that have put their trust in the Word of the God will not be disappointed. Patience, boy, that's a word. I told Pastor Langford one time I used to cross that word out every time I would find it in the Bible, because God knew, and I knew that and I'm teasing now, that his word was coming to pass in the next 5 days, so patience was irrelevant. Well, 43 years later, I've learned patience is not irrelevant, okay? So the point that I'm trying to make now is that your patience is about to be rewarded. What V has told you about the Steve Leonard, what W gave you the other day, you guys, the other night, W gave you the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone is what made it, is what made Champollion, Napoleon's guy, gave him the ability to decipher hieroglyphics. This is why Tom Horn and others have spent so much time on numerical symbology and numerology, not numerology in an occult sense, but God really does have numbers. There's a reason why 7. I had a Hindu send me an email telling me, stop using 888 because it's the devil's number. I've had another Christian who claims to be a Christian tell me, quit using 777. Well, just look up the numbers. Bullinger wrote a great book on the witness of the stars, and there's always been something to it. There's a reason 8 people were saved on the ark. There's a reason for all the numbers showing up. There's a reason for 7 spirits of the living God. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, 7 vials. You know, there's a reason for all this stuff. There's a reason for 7 days in a week. There's a reason. And I don't understand all the reasons sometimes, but look, at least pattern recognition. So the data, as V said, is warning us. We're not saying, and somebody said, what about Brother Bob's vision of July 1st? Even Al Cuppett, who's Bob's friend, I do not know Brother Bob personally, said that he doesn't think it all ends on July 1st, neither do I. And I put up a disclaimer up there. I am scared to death of dates, but I am keenly aware of illuminist and Kabbalistic patterns and numbers and sequences. And oh, by the way, one of my intercessors drew to the point, and this, everyone's going to laugh at this, but the original 7.9 earthquake was an 8.0 earthquake, and it happened at an 8-point-something depth. And when I posted the alert on all the 8s being a divine signature versus their manipulative signature, everything changed. They changed the magnitude instantly. Now, do they pay attention to those alerts? I got news to you. Yes, in real time, because they would be fools not to, and they're not fools. The only people that are fools are the people that want to argue with the alerts claiming, well, there's a natural reason this for a natural. There's a time where your reason will fail you. And again, I want to give out Holly Dale's number, 719-547-9100, 719-547-9100. All of you that are new to this or are still not in the preparation mode, she wrote a book, Dare to Prepare. I love the title. Every man of God in the Scripture, every woman of God had to dare. That means they had to go beyond their normal abilities, talents, expectations, and understandings at some point in their life. And guess what the vehicle for that is? It's called trust. Trust. Trust is the bridge that takes you from the realm of visible into the invisible realm of faith. And so, as the song says, trust and obey, for there is no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Go ahead, V.
Yeah, these are all important things that Steve has said, folks. And it's very mindful that we understand all the events that are transpiring throughout the world, all the diplomatic relations that are going on as we speak. We've had back in 2001, President George W. Bush call certain members or certain nations in this world axis of evil, and thus began our escapades into Iraq and our escapades into Afghanistan and all sorts of malarkey in the Middle East. What we have done through military force, we see that the power of economics at work in nations such as Iran, okay, where they are on board with the, with this coming trade zone, trade unions that are being formed by the Russians, what I call the Sino-Russian nexus. Okay, we've seen Japan, okay, a nation that has given up, just like what Steve talked about earlier. We had Poland say that alliance with the United States is pretty much useless, and that is the sentiment throughout the world. There's no benefit. So even a nation that's been the water boy for the United States for the longest time, Japan, is already entering into energy agreements with the Russians. They're entering into currency swap agreements with the Chinese. In fact, that's already been done. It's already a done deal, pretty much. Okay, we have the Hermit Kingdom and one of the other members of the axis of evil, North Korea, being signed on with an energy deal with the Russians in order to get a pipeline that's going to run through China, North Korea, into South Korea, onward into Japan. So these are all things that are done diplomatically, with the strong motivation being economics. Not like these neo-Satanists who are running our country, where they want to bomb everyone to oblivion. Folks, people respond to economics. People respond to prosperity, because let's be honest, whether you are living in Madison Avenue right here in Manhattan, or you're living in Mogadishu, everybody wants a comfortable life. Everybody wants an assurance of comfort. That is the underlying driver of human existence. People want to know that they are taken care of and that their families will be fed, clothed, and sheltered. That is a primordial driver, and it doesn't change. Okay? That's why economics is a powerful driver. And we see that it appears that the Russians, the Sino-Russian nexus, understands this. They understand this concept. It's not subjugation, which the Americans have been doing for such a long time, and what the British have done. It's actually allowing people to prosper, getting nations on board where they can trade amongst their own currencies. And because this thirst for truth that's existing in the world, because this thirst for real trade settlement, it is this hunger that is driving the world away from the dollar itself. Okay, and we're entering the end. We're seeing right now, folks, the final chapters being written on the petrodollar, on the United States dollar in general. Okay, so earlier in the program I gave you the whole sign scenario and the electronic exchange. The last 15 minutes I want to tell you about. This is not the end. We're not out here saying that on the 15th the world's going to come apart, the dollar's going to implode, the stock market's going to crash. That's not what I'm talking about. You see, when you're falling off a cliff sometimes, or when you're thrown off a cliff, depending on the type of cliff it is, okay, and I'm sure some of you have watched, cartoons like The Simpsons where Homer goes off the cliff and he hits a whole bunch of things on the way down. That's kind of like where we are. We have been positioned right now, cliff, okay? We're about to be pushed off of it very soon. We're going to have cascading effects within the United States that's going to send shockwaves throughout the world. Remember, you have to ask yourself the question, what is the number one thing that's holding the faith and the trust in the dollar? What's that number one thing? Well, that happens to be confidence. That happens to be the trust. So how do you destroy trust in the dollar? Well, what you do is you have to bring about as much trouble as you can to the government that stands as the quote-unquote good faith and trust of the United States government, having that stamped across their currency. You got to bring that government into some serious question. And that is why in this past Bilderberg meeting, they have all agreed, the controllers, I mean, the agreements have come from even higher than the Bilderbergers. So the decision is already made, it's already been deliberated, that they're going to allow the scandals on this current administration to be turned up to the umpteenth degree. And that is why we're seeing more and more scandal, more and more pressure on this guy. That in fact, the weight of all the scandal, all the fraud, all the anger is being focused on this guy. And it's being done for a reason because it serves two purposes. Number one, it's a distraction. Because it gets the distraction away from all the other things that are happening, such as the imploding economy. And it's a distraction primarily for Americans, because we have the attention span of a goldfish. Because we have, in terms of vision, we can only see about 10 to 12 inches in front of us. So we will be consumed in the next coming months by more and more scandals. We went from Fast and Furious and Gunwalker to Benghazi to IRS Gate to Associated Press Gate to NSA Gate to all these problems, all these scandals, and now the immigration debacle where you're having about 70,000 folks, immigrants coming across the border. Not the 30,000 I'm talking about, but 70,000 are pouring in, and if nothing stopped, you're going to have about 1 million or more come through every month. And it's by design, and who's getting the blame for it is this idiot in the White House. So this is by design. It's to distract us, the populace, from the final moves of wealth extraction that's being taken place, number one. And the second purpose of the, poop on Barry fest that's happening is the second effect of this operation is it absolutely destroys any credibility of the government in terms of responsibly creating monetary policy, number one. Number two, it absolutely, for the rest of the world, causes them to lose total confidence in any sort of leadership in part to the United States. So this is the two-pronged approach here. And it's being done on purpose. It's being done by design. So as we go off the cliff, that's going to be one of the things we're going to hit. We're going to have more political scandals. We've recently seen a gentleman who ran originally as a Cantor, ran originally as a Tea Party guy. I'm a conservative. Turned out he's a Goldman Sachs lackey. He gets exposed and thrown out. And you're seeing a distress within the nation. You're seeing upheaval like we've never seen before. We've seen the militaristic police state in action in such a way that's absolutely detestable. We've seen the treatment of veterans absolutely detestable and horrific. And these things are being done, and these things are being brought to the surface for a reason. Look, it's not a coincidence that all these scandals are happening. It's not a coincidence that all of a sudden the media gets savvy and starts reporting on this stuff. No. It's not a coincidence that Wall Street is having a come-to-Jesus meeting and their whistleblowers, quote-unquote, are coming out and saying, hey, look at high frequency trades, and hey, look at this and look at that. Look at all the crimes and and the chicanery in Wall Street. It's meant to happen. It's designed this way. We're being humiliated, isolated, and then absolutely fragmented. That's the plan. That's the agenda. So it's into this direction that we are being pushed. You know, I get emails. Some of these emails I get are from other individuals who are in the financial blogosphere, radio sphere, and television, and all that other stuff. And you know, they give me emails. You don't get it. You know what? You know, this whole swing towards the east, and I laugh at this stuff. Do you think that, you know, the real power structure, who has invented these financial vehicles, who created these instruments with mathematical precision, knowing that exactly the time and date when this stuff is going to fail, that they would allow themselves to get caught? No. This is all part of a plan. They're allowing the lackeys, the low-level guys, getting caught. They're wanting this sentiment. They want this backlash, this hatred, this mistrust towards paper. They want these things because what they're doing is they're preparing the masses for the next transition. And believe you me, sure as I know my name, the City of London will be the next again in this new, emerging economic superstructure. There's no way, there's no getting around it. They have their tentacles and everything. So this is not the end. This is the end of America as the lone superpower, as the quote-unquote economic powerhouse. Yeah, it's the end of America. But the question you got to ask is it your end as well? That's for me in my house. I'd say no, this is not going to be my end, and my fate is not tied into this country that's been hijacked from me. You're going to have to develop an exit strategy. And that's the one thing that's the most important thing. If there's an overarching theme that me and Steve and W, that all of us guys have been on the Doug Hagman and Joe Hagman show, there's an overarching theme here is you have to have an exit strategy. And I think, and I firmly believe the majority of the listening audience, they do have an exit strategy. Or they're making the right proper preparations. That's the thing here, folks. That's what you got to get. And that's that if you can have an exit strategy and you have the right setup, you're going to be able to get out of the way. You're going to be able to endure. And that's the most important thing. Doug or Steve?
Steve, go ahead.
Well, Doug, I want to let you or Joe respond, and then, I mean, obviously we're down to the last 10 minutes, and I'll go where I need to go. But I want you guys to feel free to, it's your show. And look, thank you, Doug. Thank you, Joe. You guys are gentlemen. And what we're trying to do is super saturate the information phase of the show. So go ahead and respond or say what you need to say, because I don't want to, I don't want to take away from the last 10 minutes, but I'll finish it out.
Well, thanks, Steve. I just want to reiterate a point that V made. Yeah, I didn't hear about, except what you just said about the scandals and how they're going to increase these things and divert attention away from important issues like what the economy is doing, the real price of the real value of the dollar, and how our nation is failing economically. But you're exactly right. Not only are they creating these crises, they are creating the monetary policy that has got us in this situation, and they have a plan and have had a plan to destroy our currency since, at least for 100 years, since the Federal Reserve. And as you said, they're playing it out. It's not a goal that's done in a year. This is a centuries in the making, and it's being played out with the persistence and the timing exactly as they need it to. And when you take a step back and you look at all these factors, we are in a dire situation, much closer to a collapse and a crisis than I think most people would even think about that are awake.
And Steve, before I turn it over to you and V, I just want to, V, I want to thank you for your time tonight, and Steve, you as well. But my closing remark is just quite simple. I mean, I believe, Steve and V, that everyone listening to this broadcast is doing so because you were born, and I believe everyone was, but you in particular were born for a time just as this. You've got a job to do, and you've got to play your position, and you've got to pay attention and do the right thing, and take what V said, listen to it once, twice, 3 times. Same thing with Steve. Check their websites every day because there's just a wealth of information on their websites. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, Doug, one of the things I'm waiting for, and I'll give bits and pieces of it tonight, number of years ago, and Romy, and you have this hear the word of the land, O broken a covenant, for I have a controversy with America. The hardest thing for me is to hold back stuff until I'm released because I can't do it in my own time. I can't do it in my own power. I literally know there's trust and obey. But here is a word that I was given a number of years ago, and Doug, you have this, and there are others who I can prove the date it was sent, This is concerning the entity in the White House. The kings of the earth, whose love of money has given their power unto you, will turn on you in open contempt. Your words against me, my people, and my righteousness, coupled with your idolatry and wickedness, will be made known to all. Think that's happening? Will your talismans and idols save you? For the sound of war is in your land, and your destruction looms. For I bring forth the sword of judgment on those who plan to destroy my people. O son of the fallen one, like lightning, which you have been deceived into believing that you are, will I not cast you out? And you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Now, he also, the Lord says, your idols and false beliefs will not deliver you. You will harden your heart against my people, my heritage, and with each passing hour as you make war on the sheep of my flock, your fears will multiply. Dreams and thoughts in the night will trouble you, and you will tremble in the night. For as I live, saith the Lord, I know your thoughts and see your actions, and you are weighed in the balance and found lacking. Already the drums of war beat louder and louder, and your betrayal by those who back you draws closer with each minute of the day. And Doug, that was given to me, and that's only part of it. It's about half of it. There's a reason why I won't release the rest of it right now, but the point being is this, is that the very thing that V just said, and V and I didn't know each other when this thing was given. By the way, I said 2 years ago. I think it was closer to 3 years ago. I have to check my email log, Fortunately, I kept it backed up on one of my disks. A word to Pharaoh. The point being, ladies and gentlemen, is this. When God speaks concerning a nation to tear it down, he speaks. A lot of you, and listen, I commend anybody that's praying, but here's what you need to pray for. It's past the time. Today, within probably the first 2 hours would be enough, 6:30 to 8:30 my time. I'm sorry, 5:30 to 7:30 my time. I was up at 5:30, started posting, I think, about 6 o'clock. The point is that multiple intercessors had gotten the same word from the Lord. They don't know each other, but when one of them was praying for the Lord to hold it off, he said, I will not answer that prayer. My judgment is now. It is time. Independently, see, this is what people can't understand because the churches have not preached from the Word of God. This is critical. Because they have left their flocks, the pastors have turned into wolves. Actually, I think vampires is a better metaphor, but we'll use the biblical word wolf. And they have, basically, how do we say this, fleeced the flock and muttonized the lambs. In other words, they've eaten the young of the flock. The point is people are unprepared. And the Bible in Ephesians says that God gave some to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, teachers, pastors for the perfecting of the saints. That means the equipping of the saints. And people are unequipped for battle. They do not understand, number one, the nature of their enemy, although Russ Dizdar has done a good job on that, does a great job on that, but so few people want to deal with that. John Quayle and others that are preaching, teaching, and speaking out deliverance, they're doing a great job on that. But it's so confined to such a small group. Meanwhile, the headlines are filled with apocalyptic terminology, biblical end time. And, oh, by the way, isn't it interesting? They're not calling the mainstream. They only call us the names. They don't call the mainstream the names when the mainstream has to hijack us. And don't kid yourself. if I told you who is on my website every day, and just beyond the, obviously the government and the Air Force and the military and all that, but famous people in the media, and they, this too, Doug, they can't quote you and they can't quote me, and you've had someone at Fox tell you, we can't even go near you guys. They'd never let us even bring you on or quote you,
Right.
Or V.
Right.
V is the most ripped-off guy on the Internet, and I see his articles with no attribution. Here's how I don't care who uses my stuff as long as they give attribution, because the bottom line is it's wrong to steal someone's words and then make them your own and claim it's yours, okay? So when as an author, I try to, and you've read my books, Doug. B, you've read a couple of them. Joe, you have too. I always try and footnote and give attribution. If I don't know who said it, I'll openly say it. But I learned a long time ago that it's one thing to preach another man's words. It's totally impossible to preach even the anointed word from an experiential point when you haven't lived the life that the message from the man evolved out. That's why David Langford is, and I say this, is the preacher he is. He gets the word of the Lord from the Lord. He teaches what God gives him. Before we go on, I pray and I say, Lord, where do you want me to go tonight? I can't tell you how my email box fills up. Talk about this, talk about that. No, I have to do what I'm told to do. The same thing with V. I would say this. I'll say it one last time. For those of you that heard the last presentation of Doug with V and W, you guys were given the Grail. You guys were given the Rosetta Stone. If you don't know what that is, or let me make it even easier, you guys were given the key to the Illuminati lock on their plans and their time. Now, can they change it just because we're talking about it on national and international talk radio on the Internet and wherever else it's broadcast? Of course they can, but you know what? They don't care, because you represent, I represent, we represent, we're like fleas to these guys, okay? But even a flea can cause enough, irritation to get sprayed with flea and tick whatever they call that, repellent. But the point being is that the majority of people still won't act. They won't, and now I'm talking specifically about Christians. Christians have always found it easier to say everything, do nothing, and criticize all, okay? Now, I've been a big boy. I've been in this thing for 43 years, called salvation and working out my salvation with fear and trembling. I don't think it's an understatement to say that when you've written, the books I've written over the years I've written, decades, that's a better statement. To this point, Doug, people still won't believe, especially Christians, about chemtrails. They still won't believe about HAARP, H-A-A-R-P. That isn't, the American Association of Retired People, okay? And people say, well, they shut it down. Patent number 4686605. Go look it up. 4686605. It's kind of like that song that was a rock and roll song. Maybe if I turned it into a rock and roll song, people would believe it then. But that's only one of hundreds of weather control patents. When somebody says to me, Steve, I don't believe they can control the weather, I'm sorry, you're ignorant. You're absolutely ignorant. Because you can go and look on the document, We Own the Weather 2025, the report. By the way, that's in my book, Weather Wars. Of all the books I've ever written, Doug, this is just an astonishing thing to me. Weather Wars was the most ahead of its time, right on, it's called Weather Wars and Unnatural Disasters. It was so far ahead of its time, maybe that was its problem, that people just simply can't understand. I could quote everything. By the way, that document, I think, is in the back of my book, Weather Wars, and all of the footnotes. The problem is that I can't walk the intelligent walk for people that won't even step into the shoes to see if these things be so. So the point being is, because of the technological and scientific ignorance of the majority of the evangelical world, really, you think the average pastor wants to teach on quantum physics, on a Sunday? No, he probably wants to teach on his golf score and how a hole-in-one is like when he came to Jesus. It was like being on the fairway of life, and he just finally reached out, and he took that. I don't know, I don't play golf, I throw golf clubs, but I don't hit the balls. The point being is that it's just like coming to Jesus was just like hitting that home run. That is the most moronic, these metaphors from the pulpit. Somebody said, if you guys got to use that stuff, you got to understand this. Number one, he's not there for the right reason, and number two, he certainly isn't seeking the counsel of God, because God's not interested in his par score on the course that day. He's interested in equipping the saints. The saints aren't equipped. So Joe and Doug, I want to thank you for allowing V and W and everyone else of your guests who come on to equip the saints to whatever saints are listening. I can't walk anybody's walk for them any more than anybody can walk mine. V, God bless you. Again, I think you delivered your soul tonight, my brother. It was outstanding. It was just beyond what anybody I have ever heard lay it out as simply and concisely as you.
Right on, brother. V, thank you so very much. That'll do it. We're out of time. God bless you both, gentlemen. Thank you so much. We're absolutely out of time. Joe?
Until tomorrow, God bless. Stay safe, and we will see you back here tomorrow, 8 p.m. Another announcement. On Friday, we will be joined by Paul McGuire. He will be our guest for Friday night. So tomorrow we'll be here live, 8 o'clock, and then Friday, Paul McGuire. Good night. God bless.